Good morning. This is Heather Klusendorf at NYSED in sunny Albany this morning. Thank you so much for all of you out there for joining. So we've got, I am the head of the grades 3 through 8 ELA and Math CBT program at NYSED. And this morning we've got Christy Tooker, who is going to lead us through most of the slides in a deep dive into Nextera admin so that when you leave this, you will all be experts. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted on CBT support within 48 hours. You can listen to it over and over again to your heart's content. And we'll try to make sure and post that in an announcement also so that folks know that it is when it is available. So Christy Tooker is going to introduce herself in a moment, but I just want to let you know that if you have questions, you should use the question feature in the GoToWebinar on the upper right. Okay, send us questions and we will answer them. We've got a room filled with NYSED staff. We've got Claire DeSorbo, Bureau Chief at the Office of State Assessment. Kiara Harold is here, head of the CBT support desk. Shannon Logan, head of the EdTech office, and Robin Boone from the Office of State Assessment. So when you have questions, just put them in there. And then those questions, we turn them into an FAQ on CBT support. So it's really helpful for everybody. Okay, and we will stop. When we start to see that there are hot topics and that folks really need to discuss something or talk to us further about an issue, we'll go ahead and stop and have a discussion at large. Okay, so with further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so those are the introductions, and we've got next slide. Oh, first, whoops, sorry, couldn't see. Okay, first of all, we've got the presentation. It is posted on CBT support. When we're live in a room, usually this is the point where I ask, hands up, who's seen CBT support? If you have not, you should be very familiar with CBT. Make yourself familiar with cbtsupport.nysed.gov. This is your one-stop shop for all your CBT needs. We post articles weekly. We provide information. Registration is here. You can find timelines, process flows. Pretty much everything about CBT is available here on CBT support, as is today's presentation. Okay? You can either type in the link that you see on screen, or you can navigate to cbtsupport.nysed.gov, search on the word presentation, or click on grades 3 through 8, and you'll find the presentation slides in the CBT resources box. Okay, we're going to go through Nextera admin. We're going to talk about how to set up classes. We're going to talk about internet outages, which has been the absolute hottest topic this year at all of the CBT roadshows. We're going to talk about new features, the test delivery system, what's new there for students, what's new for administrators, and what's still coming. We're not going to break for lunch. This is only 3 hours here today, but we are going to go through all the slides so that you're getting the same content that we made available in the CBT roadshows. We're going to do a live demonstration. Typically, Christy shows the multi-student edit. This is a great feature in Nextera admin that allows users to set multiple students with testing accommodations all at once as a group. Okay? And then we'll have a roundtable discussion if we still have time and if we've not already covered your questions. One thing that we do during these webinars is we like to stop. We like to meander and stop and have conversations. So if there's anything left for us to cover that hasn't been asked, we'll cover that at the end. All right. So CBT progression. This year's administration represents 15% of all schools in New York State. So last year we had 4% of all schools. We've got a great increase this year, and we're very proud to have so many schools on board this year. And that's 15% of all schools administering at least one subject in grade level CBT. And more than 40 scoring consortia have been established for CBT scoring this year. So we're pretty proud of our numbers and the increase. Yay! Next. All right, here we have the CBT timeline. You can find this on cbtsupport.nysed.gov. This is what we call our significant events or significant dates. And this timeline, you should be familiar with where this article exists on CBT support, because as we add more dates, we annotate the article at the bottom on CBT support and let folks know what dates have been added or if dates have changed. For instance, we already know that the Proctor webinar most likely is going to have to change. You can see on the timeline that is 3/27. We've heard throughout the state that that is falling on spring break for a lot of folks. We were at first surprised that folks don't want to come in from spring break and hang out with us, but okay, we get it. So we'll be moving that date and we'll be posting that date by this Friday. So we'll be updating the article on CBT support. You can see here when next year admin is going to be opened for ELA and for math. For ELA, students will be loaded on February 20th. So that's coming up. That's the date when folks will be able to get in and start creating classes, adding teachers, moving students around into classes, and setting student testing accommodations. Okay. Many folks, they like to print this and put it on their wall. Totally recommend that. I think it makes great wall art. Okay. Okay. Right. So what does CBT look like in the past 3 years? This is year 3 of the computer-based testing program. The first year was the option for all schools to participate in CBT field testing. Right? We gave them the option between paper and computer. We had more than 900 schools that administered field tests on computers, and that represented more than 60,000 students across the state. That was 2015 to 16, and overall, it was a success for the majority of our schools. Next year, this is last year, this past spring, we had more than 800 schools that participated in field testing, but a lot of those schools that had participated in the previous year in field testing, they chose to do operational. Last year was the first year that we offered operational CBT to our schools. We had 184 schools from 84 districts throughout the state, and more than 28,000 students that took the operational tests on computers. The breakdown is about 16,000 for ELA and more than 11,000 for math. And typically, this is when you see us live, we ask, can anybody guess why we had more for ELA versus math? That's right, the equation editor. That's right. So the equation editor was new software to many districts and schools throughout the state, but not to all. So we did have some high math populations in districts and schools where they were using complementary software that had very similar features to the equation editor. Software that we've heard is called Alex. So you might want to check with your BOCES or your RIC to see if, or your BOCES to see if that's available software, if you're interested in that. And then ELA was much more popular. Students had the typing or the familiarity with typing a little bit more than the equation editor. And this year, we've got more than 1,200 schools planning to administer the field tests on computers. And all schools were given the option again this year to select subject and grade. We have more than 650 schools planning to administer the operational tests. And this represents more than 100,000 students per session for ELA and for math for those administrative windows. We're really excited that we have expanded so much, and we're excited to have so many new schools on board this year. Okay. But for between last year and this year, every school that administered CBT last spring in 2017 and ordered tests this year is doing CBT again. The trend is that those schools that might have done 1 or 2 grades last year, they're all in this year. They have expanded their subjects or their grades. They've either added another subject or they've added more grades. And this is a great way to transition to CBT. Do it for a couple grades at first and then expand and find out that it really is simpler and that the students do like it. We're really proud of the fact that we have no dropouts from last year's CBT administration. Okay. You can see here, this is an overview of what our CBT populations look like across the state. Last year, CineRIC was overwhelmingly our leader in CBT. This year, they have more than 100 schools. But NARIC has pulled into the lead with 144 schools in that region. And you can see that almost all of our regions in New York doubled or tripled their CBT operational schools this year. We are so proud. And we've got quite a few big fives that are on board for this year. Okay, so we continue to work directly with our RICs. We want to remind you folks that if you are not already in contact or receiving information from your Regional Information Center's testing department, be familiar with them. Find out who they are. They're the folks who are going to help you directly during operational CBT, and they are a great support. We're very, very proud to be working with them again this year. Okay? So how do you get information about CBT? Well, one thing you can do is you can sign up to the CBT listserv. We send messages every Friday with new content, registration, training opportunities, anything that's changed, and helpful tips and reminders for CBT. So the way that you sign up is you go to cbtsupport.niceed.gov and search on listserv, LISTSERV, no E, it is one word. You can see it there on screen. So sign up for the listserv, send us your information, and you too can read exciting emails on Friday afternoons or over the weekend about CBT. During operational CBT, we launch a known issues section on CBT support. So we encourage then all our schools to sign up and be subscribed to new issue alerting so that you know what's happening during operational CBT. If an issue arises, we will tell you. If an issue arises and we fix it, we will tell you. And also, if there's important policy information that we find that most of our schools need to know, we'll post it here. We'll pull it out of the SAM, we'll pull it out of the teacher's directions. We'll make sure that you have the information you need quickly. For instance, last year during operational math, there was a storm that rolled across the state and it knocked out a transformer in central New York. And so we had a lot of schools that had to move to a makeup session because they didn't have any electricity or internet for one of their days of testing. And so we went ahead and posted the policy so that they knew very quickly how exactly to contact, what were they responsible for notifying NICED about. Okay? And then after each operational window, we do a lessons learned after ELA. It is absolutely my favorite webinar to do. We share all these tips. We let you know best practices. We let you know what did other schools do around the region to have a successful CBT. One of the best things that we learned last year, which was so helpful, we had a lot of schools that had one-to-one laptop scenarios. Say they had students with Chromebooks. Well, those students took the Chromebooks home overnight, and they came into school ready to test, and they had not charged their laptops. Oh, no, right? So these students, they were getting the low battery notification pop-up on their computers, and that notification, it was booting them out of the test every time. So we advise the schools to make sure and remind your students about charging their laptops, but also have extra cords, have additional power strips on hand, have the hardware identified that you may need to avoid that kind of scenario. As a result, our math administration went so smoothly. We had fewer students being booted out of the test as a result of low battery, because you know what? We shared that with our folks throughout the state. And then after operational CBT, we asked that our administrators go and fill out a survey. We post a survey on NextEra admin as well as on CBT support. And this is where we're asking you, what was it like in your school? Share with us your feelings. We want your feelings. A lot of the questions are, did your students like the test? 1, yes, 5, no. But also we have a lot of open-ended questions. And this is where our schools get to send us their words, their feelings, and let us know, what was it like for your students? What do your students need in order to be more successful on the computer-based tests? What does your school need in order to transition more grades to CBT? Last year, the #1 feedback was about the highlighter, the online tool. And there were specific improvements that our schools said that we needed to make in order for that tool to be really helpful to our students. Guess what? We made those improvements. So when you send us your feelings, you send us your words, we might make it happen. We might make that into an enhancement for the next year's administration. You can also always send us your words through cbtsupport.niceed.gov. Okay, so you can always send us an email. And then we also have feedback sessions with the RICs and with individual districts after operational CBT. Okay, so there we go. All right, Christy. Well, Here we go. Christy Tooker now is going to take the virtual stage.
Thanks,
Take
Heather.
it away. Welcome.
My name is Christy Tooker. I am the Technical Readiness and Sustainability Consultant at Questar. I specifically work on the New York team. So I'm going to be taking you through most of the rest of the presentation here. If you have any questions, as Heather said earlier, please put those questions into the questions box. And our team here at NYSED, and then I also have some colleagues on the phone that are going to be answering those questions for you. If we see hot topics, we will surely stop and answer those questions live for you. So this next section, we're going to talk about the testing dates. For ELA, the administration dates for operational testing are April 10th to April 17th, with makeup dates the 13th to the 20th, and scoring dates April 16th to May 3rd. The math operational testing dates are May 1st to May 8th, with makeup dates May 4th to the 11th, and scoring dates May 4th to May 16th. For CBT field testing, you have a 3-week window for both ELA and math. These administration dates are May 21st to June 8th. The next section I want to talk a little bit about is the similarities and differences between operational versus field testing. So in talking about the similarities, we use the same test delivery system. You'll hear me refer to the secure browser throughout the rest of this presentation. And that's the same secure browser is used for both operational and field tests. This is the student experience. This is where the student goes in to log into the device, to log into the test and take the test. So that is the secure browser, and it is used for both operational and field tests. Also, the student username is the same. They use their NYSED ID for both tests. We use the same test administration system. So you may be familiar with Nextera Admin up until this point. So we do use Nextera Admin for both operational and field tests. Also, there's the same technical requirements for devices and network for both operational and field tests. And of course, we use the same customer service contact information. If you have access to Nextera Admin, you can simply go to the Help tab and click on Help, and you will see our customer support contact information there. I will also share that information in a slide later in this presentation. So in speaking about the differences, so let's talk about operational tests first. So some of the differences between operational and field tests in reference to operational tests only, this does require technology readiness verification. If you were an operational school, you had to complete a series of steps to become tech ready. And I'll talk about those steps in a little bit. But just know if you're a field testing school this year and you plan to go operational next year, this technology readiness verification will be required year after year. For operational tests, this requires constructed responses to be scored on computer. Some of you may be tied up with some of your local districts and created what we call a consortium. Or you may be working with a local vendor to get those responses scored. Whatever the case may be, if you're an operational school, those constructed responses are scored on computer. There are 2 test sessions for operational tests this year within a 6-day administration window and a 3-day makeup window. There's a policy that requires an entire grade to be scheduled for primary administration on the same 2 consecutive days. Also, for operational tests, schools do select the subject and grade for operational CBT. You made that decision when you ordered CBT through NYSED's ordering system. In reference to field tests, some of the differences between field tests and operational, this is 1 session to be administered in a single class period of approximately 45 minutes. This is also a low-stakes testing environment. If technical difficulties do come up, we ask that you stop. You can contact the Office of State Assessment and work on next steps with them. For field tests, this is also a 3-week administration window. This gives you that flexibility to try out CBT testing and to see how it works for your school or district. Also, Questar scores all responses for field tests. And different from operational tests, if you chose that you wanted to test online for field tests, You do not select your subject and grade. NICET and Questar work together to assign the subject and grade for field testing. And there'll be one content and one grade per school if you chose to test online for field tests. So the next section here, this will pretty much take us through the entire presentation, but I will be going over the Questar's platforms. Then I will move into the technical requirements for testing online, and then we'll deep dive into each of our main systems that you'll be using, which is the Nextera test delivery system, that's the student experience, and followed by the Nextera admin, which is you as the administrator. This is where you go to get your classes and students set up, as well as other tasks. And so that's called Nextera admin. So let's talk about each of those briefly before we deep dive into them. So overview of our platforms. Let's first talk about the question sampler. The question sampler is a web-based tool where students can become familiar with the test format, the question types, and the tools they will experience during testing. This is a website. We highly encourage you to have your students go into the question sampler, test out the different tools that they may see during testing. And I will share with you the URL for that shortly, but you can simply just go to Google and type in NY question sampler, and you can follow the links to get to the question sampler. This offers practice with previously released state questions. Next is the Nextera test delivery system. You'll hear me often talk about the secure browser. This is downloaded onto the student's device. This is not a website. So you at your schools need to be downloading the secure browser onto each student's device so that the student can then log in and take their test. This is where the student does access and complete their test. And there also are additional practice with previously released state questions that are available in the test delivery system. Nextera admin. This is where you as the administrator, this is basically the back end of our testing system. It's an online test administration system. It is simply just a website. So again, you can, anywhere from that you have internet connection, you can log into Nextera admin. It's multi-tiered and role-based. What does that mean? Basically, there are different roles within the system, and depending on your role will depend what type of access you have. For instance, if you're a tech coordinator, you might not need access to students in classes. You're just there to gather the downloads to put the secure browser onto students' devices. So again, depending on your role will depend on what access you have in Nextera admin. And as we get into the Nextera admin in a little bit, you'll understand that fully and to see what roles are available in Nextera admin. Also, this is where you manage students and student test taking. And lastly, we will not go into this in full today, but ScorePoint is our centrally hosted software application to score written and constructed response items entered by students during computer-based testing. So if you are a consortium that will be working together with other schools, you will be scoring your constructed responses in our system called ScorePoint. We will be hitting the road again in March to discuss this in full and go through a full presentation about ScorePoint. There will also be a webinar just like this if you are unable to join one of those sessions. So let's talk a little bit more about the question sampler. Again, this is available from a web page and can be used by students, parents, teachers, or administrators. You'll see on the bottom right, that is the direct URL to the question sampler. And again, you can access that by just going to Google and typing in NY for New York question sampler. For all of our systems, your best experience is used when you use a Chrome browser. So we highly suggest that you're using Chrome for both the question sampler and Nextera admin, as well as ScorePoint, but we'll talk about that in the coming weeks. Users can preview the testing tools without downloading and installing a secure browser or application. So again, we encourage your students to be logging in or going to the question sampler and choosing their subject, choosing their grade level, getting those tools in front of them. It's very important prior to testing that they're not surprised with any of the tools that they may see. Users can preview test accommodations and 5 translated languages. Text-to-speech, being one of those accommodations, is available in English only. And there are 3 samplers per subject and grade level. Nextera admin, the URL is also there on the bottom right, but know if you are activated in our system as a user, so if you're an operational school and you are a district test coordinator or a principal, you will already have had access to the system, and you received, upon activation, an email that was directly sent to your inbox. And in that email, it gave you your username and password, as well as a link to Nextera admin. So it's not necessarily important to write down that URL, but that information is there for your reference. So it's a secure web-based administration system that provides access to all users with no additional downloads. So some of the things that you might do when you access Nextera admin, you can access your students and classes. There's a lot of important information in the test tab. You can add accounts and reset passwords. This is also where you'll come to collect those downloads for your students' devices. And you can also access our customer support information and other support documentation in our help tab. And I'll go through all of these in the coming slides. Next, I will go in depth about the Nextera test delivery system. This is a secure browser that is installed on each student's device. This allows the test to be presented securely on the device. And what that means is when the student is clicking that icon on their desktop or their tablet, when they open up that secure browser, all other web pages are basically shut down. So they can't access outside websites or other programs while using the secure browser. This also provides confidence in saving student responses. Test content is cached to the student's testing device when the student logs in. Students' responses are continuously sent to Questar, and those responses are stored and encrypted locally on the computer device in case of network loss. And we'll go through in a little bit all of the different catastrophic moments that could occur during testing, whether it be an internet outage or if we want to get a little bit more bold and a computer blows up, we will talk about those different situations. But we understand that situations could arise, so we want you to be prepared if that does happen in your school or district. And again, I won't be going too much into this, but just know that there is another program called ScorePoint. It's a secure web-based application where thousands of readers can score online at the same time. This is also a website where you would receive credentials. You would then log in, and you, as a scoring director or a team leader or just a reader, would have different access, and then you would come here and score your constructed response answers. Let's get into technical requirements next. So here you'll see there's quite a bit of information here, but there's a few things that I want to call out. As I'm going through this technical requirements, please know that there is also a manual called the Setup and Installation Guide that is posted on CBT support. When you are downloading your secure browsers or checking to see if your devices are indeed ready to test for computer-based testing this year, please reference that Setup and Installation Guide. There are several different key points for depending on the device that you are using. Some of our devices that we do support, we support Windows and Mac desktops, as well as Chromebooks and Apple iPads. Also, I want to point out that for iPad, we no longer support iPad 2s. And the reason for that is that Apple has dropped support for those devices. So a couple of other pieces of information that I want to point on this screen also, for your tablets, we do not support anything below a minimum screen size of 10 inches. We want your students to have the best experience that they can with the largest possible screen device. So we do not support the iPad minis, for instance. So you can go through this page. This is in the Setup and Installation Guide as well. Reference it for your school or your district. Some other notes to talk about here. Chromebooks are supported with a kiosk mode Chromebook app, as well as on Chrome through the secure managed accounts. For all of our systems, there are no Java or Flash dependencies. The Mac Secure Browser is 64-bit only, and only Intel Macs are supported, which are all 64-bit. And then we also talk a little bit here about thin clients. We understand that your systems could be set up differently than your neighboring district. Please reference that setup and installation guide. If there's something in there that you that doesn't explain further how your systems are set up, reach out to our customer support line. They've heard a lot of different system configurations and questions, and they would be there to help you, guide you to make sure that you are going to have the best experience possible. There typically sits a proxy server between the student's machine and the internet, so it's important to allow all HTTP access on ports 80 and 443. It's also important to whitelist these domains, questarAI.com, .net, as well as the mobile app. One of the most important things that I can think about when we talk about whitelisting is that our systems do generate those emails that include your usernames and passwords. And if you aren't whitelisting our domains, they could end up in a junk or spam folder. So it's really important that you're working with your tech folks to make sure that these domains are whitelisted. Next, I want to talk a little bit about our public-facing webpage. If you go to questarai.com/readiness, there are a couple of different tools there for your use. The first one is the system scan tool. This displays system specifications and visual confirmation of whether the system meets each of the technical requirements. Items checked include the system type, operating system, screen resolution, so on and so forth. It's really important that if you have different devices in your district, or even if it's just one type of device, let's say, for instance, I'm using Windows and desktops and Chromebooks. It's important to run the system scan on each type of device that you are planning on testing on. Also on that same website are the test readiness recommendation. Anyone can quickly determine their local download upload speeds with the test readiness check. You simply input some additional information, and these tools can be used to validate if testing can be completed for the number of concurrent students testing in the given time frame with the available bandwidth. So again, these tools are located right on our public-facing webpage, just /readiness, and anyone can use these tools on any of their devices. I wanted to talk a little bit about the technology readiness verification that operational schools needed to complete this year. This is already done and over with, but if you're a field tester and you're planning on going operational next year, these same tools will be used year to year. And even for those schools that are operational this year and also planning on going operational next year, again, you will be required year after year to complete the CBT technology readiness verification. So once you went into NYSED's ordering portal and you indicated that you wanted to test online for operational this year, NYSED then provided Questar with a list of those schools. From there, we went into Nextera admin at Questar and activated the district test coordinator and the principal for your school and district. You also were provided with a quick reference guide on how to verify your technology readiness. Once you logged into our system, you went to the Help tab, and on the right-hand side of the page here, this screenshot is an example of what that technology readiness page looks like. You needed to complete a series of 9 checkpoints. As you checked off those boxes, you got to the bottom of the page where you were asked to input your device type. We are just collecting that information for our own purposes this year. Then once you entered that information, then you were able to hit submit. From there, Questar could pull a report to see that everyone, indeed, all 662 of you, that's the right number? Yeah. 662 of you have indeed completed tech readiness. If along the way that you felt you were not indeed ready, you at that point could revert to paper. But just know that each and every one of you did complete tech readiness this year. And this was completed by December 29th of 2017. So again, this is done and over with. We thank you for going in and completing your tech readiness. Yay. So let's talk a little bit about internet connection. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about some of the, an issue that could arise during testing. Something as simple as your internet dropping when a student is indeed testing. This first flow chart is your best case scenario. So let's talk about this first Then we'll get into other situations. So when a student logs into the test, it's important at that point that the student does have internet connection. A student can't log into a test if there is no internet connection. Once a student logs in, they select their test session and the test package is downloaded onto that student's device. At that point, the student begins entering responses. And as they're entering responses, there's a heartbeat going on in the background that about every 60 seconds, that heartbeat picks up those responses and sends those responses to Questar servers. The student then continues testing. They get to the end of the test, and at final submission, the final student uploads are sent to Questar servers, and a server confirmation receipt is received, and the student at that point can exit the test. So that's best case scenario. There's no issues with the internet, and there's a continuous flow throughout testing. Let's say something like this occurs, and in this example, the internet connection is lost partway through the test, but it does come back by the end of the test session. So again, the student needs that internet connection in order to log into the test. They select their test session, and the test package is downloaded onto the student's device. Let's just say for this example, the student does answer a few questions. So maybe they get to number 5. Up until that point, that heartbeat was going on in the background, and the student's responses were delivered to Questar servers. But let's say at this point now, they get after number 5, their connection has been dropped. There's an indicator on the upper left-hand corner of the student's device, and I'll show you that in a moment, where the student will know if they're online or offline. But know that the student can continue testing at this point. So just because they lost internet connection, because that test package is downloaded onto the student's device, the student can continue entering responses. So the student continues entering responses. They get to the end, maybe number 30, and that internet connection is restored. Well, guess what? That heartbeat's going to pick up right where it left off, grab those responses, send them to Questar servers, and before the student gets to the end of the test, that heartbeat is continuing with them. When they get to the end of the test, because they have an internet connection, the student at that point is able to submit their test, and that final they'll get the server response receipt that their test has indeed been submitted. So that's also an okay scenario. The internet is lost partway through the test, but it is restored before the end of the test. Let's say, worst case, that the internet connection drops and it doesn't get picked up before the end of the test session. So that's what this example shows. Again, you need that internet connection at the beginning of the test. The student is logs into the test, they select their test session, and that test package is downloaded onto the student's device. Let's just say that a student gets to number 5 again, and at that point, the internet drops. At this point, the student, again, can continue to respond to their test questions. They'll go through the test. But let's say they get all the way to the end of the test, and the internet connection has not been restored. Well, at this point, those answers have been stored on the local cache of that device. So a student needs to log out of their test at this point, but you as the administrator need to sequester that device until the student can come back and go back into their test. They would log back in and submit their test. So let's talk about that a little bit differently. So a student gets to the end of the test. The internet has not been restored. At that point, because there is no internet, the student cannot submit their test. You as the administrator need to sequester that device because those responses are stored locally on that device. So when Johnny's internet comes back, so you as the administrator are trying to work with this machine now to get that internet to connect. Maybe 5 o'clock rolls around, Heather, and the student has already gone home, but they have got the internet back.
Oh, what do we do there? Okay.
Can an administrator submit that test for the student?
That's a great question. So we got 2 different scenarios here. So first I'm gonna address what you have just noted. So you've got, say, 1 student or say 3 students where their tests weren't submitted. They have told the administrators, the proctors, yes, I fully completed my test. I'm done. Internet comes back, 5 o'clock. You may have 2 humans that work together to submit those students' tests. Keep in mind that via Nextera admin, you have access to those students' usernames and passwords, and you have the proctor pin. So you can submit those tests. However, consider that you have an internet outage and say it affects a large group of students. I'll use the example of one class. Say the Wi-Fi is knocked out in one class. You've got 30 students. You're not sure if they all finish their test or if some finish their test. The best practice there would bring those students back in the next morning. In this scenario, the Wi-Fi was fixed overnight magically. And so those students come back in the morning and they re-access the test and they will submit the test on their own, right? As a group, as part of, as that class. Now, keep in mind that all 30 of those students need assistance from the proctor. The proctor pin has to be entered in order for them all to re-access their test and hit submit. So 2 different scenarios. Think about populations. Think about, did you expressly hear from those students, I've submitted that test? And keep in mind, you'll hear us often refer to the 2-human system, okay? 2 humans. Thanks, Christy.
So the next slide that I put up is a little bit of a, in words of basically what I just said, but know that also that this information is located in the setup and installation guide for you to refer back to at any point. I referred also to the online offline indicator that the student sees. So on the left side of the page, this is just a snippet of the top left corner of a student's device during testing. So they may either see that green check online or that red X offline. And this is just the indicator as to what the student sees during testing if they indeed do go offline. They are not interrupted in any other way and they can continue testing. It's just that when they get to the end of that test, that they need to be able to return to that same device in order to submit their test in full. Also, an enhancement on our Nextera administration system this year, this is also just a snippet of the page, and I'll use the arrow so you can all see. There's a new indicator here. It's called the connection status, and this is located on the test page, and I'll show you that in more context when we get into Nextera admin. But there is a connection status indicator that if you are sitting behind your device as an administrator and you are watching and actively keeping an eye on things in your district or school, you will be able to see that if a student is offline or online by simply looking at this column on the test page.
No.
So the next section that I'm going to go into is the Nextera test delivery system. The Nextera test delivery system, this is where the students access the Nextera test delivery system through the secure browser, which will be downloaded onto the student's devices. It could be by your tech coordinators, it could be by you. That will be a local decision. But just know that this secure browser does need to be downloaded onto each student's device. This is an example of what that icon will look like on the computer. Students double-click the Questar secure browser icon to launch the Nextera test delivery system. And again, I spoke about this a little bit, but students cannot access outside websites or programs while using the secure browser. So we're going to go into basically a deep dive of what it looks like for the student at this point. So when the student clicks on that icon, this is an example of what the home page looks like for that student. At this point, they'll have already received their nicest ID and password because those are all printed out on login tickets. And you as the administrator in the room will be passing those out prior to the actual test beginning. So the student will already have their login ticket sitting in front of them. At this point, they'll type in their nicest ID and password. You'll see a little eyeball next to in the line of the password. And this eyeball, if you click on that, it will unmask that student password so that the student can actually see what they're typing as they type it versus just the asterisks that you may be familiar with. So once a student clicks on, types in their nicest ID and password, they click sign in, and they're brought to the verification screen. On this page, the student will check to make sure that this is indeed them. They want to make sure that their name is correct, they're taking the correct grade level exam, as well as the correct content. In a situation where this may not be correct, the next page will talk about when a student could continue testing and when a student should stop testing. So if, for instance, there's an incorrect spelling of the student's name or even just an incorrect date of birth, NICED has said that we can move forward in testing. This is something that can be adjusted later. So if it's just an incorrect spelling or an incorrect date of birth, just contact your DTC and it can be fixed at a later time, and advise the student to continue testing. In the case where they get to this page and there might be an incorrect grade level, make sure that you are stopping at that point. Also, wrong student name. You don't want to be taking your neighbor's exam. So it's really important that you do see your name and your grade level. If at any point you do not see these two pieces of information, you need to confirm, number one, that you have received the correct login ticket. So maybe the proctor in the room just handed you the wrong login ticket so that you're using your neighbor's login ticket instead of yours. That could be an easy fix, that you would just switch those login tickets. But if it's something a little bit more severe than that, we ask that you're contacting Questar customer support, and we will work with you to make sure that that student is indeed seeing what they're supposed to be seeing. So if everything is correct on this at this point, you would continue testing and hit yes, and you'll be brought to the test selection page. Once the student completes the verification, they then choose the test test session in which they will be taking. So at this point, let's say that the proctor in the front of the room has their teacher's directions in front of them, and they're saying, let's start session 1. So then you'll click start test. Know that you might have a bold child in the room that says, no, I'm going to take session 2. At that point, if a student accidentally or on purpose chooses the wrong session, they will be stopped at a later point before they access the test, and that's called the access code. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there is a specific access code that they'll have to type in prior to gaining access to that test. So the student will hit start test for whatever session they're taking. And at this point, again, you will have the teacher's directions in front of you, and the student will be following along with you on the screen as you read those teacher's directions. So once the student selects the test directions display will, with the grade level, subject, and session number will display. The student will go use the right arrow and click through the directions at this point. The first set of directions, and I'm going to talk about these as we go along, the online-offline indicator. So we already talked about that a little bit. There's a green check mark if there's an online internet status, or a red X if you are offline. In the upper right-hand corner of the test, they'll see a directions button and a pause sign out button. The directions button, if a student at any point needs to refer back to these directions for any reason, they have that button and the ability to open these back up at any point. Pause sign out, we'll talk about that in just a moment. There's also a review screen. So if for any reason, at the end of a test, when the student gets to the end of the test, they will have to click on that review and submit button in order to review their test and then ultimately submit their test. There's also in the upper right-hand corner, move between questions. So you can move right or left throughout the test, 1, 2, 3, or backwards if needed. For ELA tests, you may see the split screen control. So there are buttons in the middle of the page because there's a passage on the left side and there's the question and answers on the right side of the page. If a student is reading that passage for the initial time maybe, and they want to expand this middle bar, they want to push it to the right so it makes their passage larger, there's that split screen control in the middle of the page. Some additional tools that a student may come across is the Zoom tool. So the student can zoom in or zoom out of their test to make it larger or smaller. There's also a bookmark and note icon. So these tools are used question by question. So if a student gets to, let's say, number 3, and they want to bookmark that question for whatever the case may be, if the student just wants to refer back to it later, maybe they don't know the answer and they want to think about it a little more, they can bookmark that question, and when they get to the submit page, it will actually show that icon on number 3 so that it reminds the student to return back to that question for whatever reason. There's also a note tool, and the note tool allows the student to actually take notes on that particular question. This is also going to be used for planning your constructive responses. An enhancement this year is that a student can copy and paste from the passage to the note or the note to the constructive response box. It's really important to make sure that your students' final answers are in the constructed response box on the particular question. We do not score anything that remains in the notepad. So just something that you want to talk to your students about ahead of time. Some other tools that a student may come across, the highlighter tool. Highlighting will persist this year across the passage for multiple questions, but the highlighter tool makes sure the students are trying that out ahead of time. They can try it out in the question sampler. Also, the answer eliminator. As you can see, my hands, not so much. This is a red X that occurs.
She is making an X. I can verify that's an X.
This is a red X that a student can put through letter A, letter B, whatever the case may be, as a visual for the student that an answer may be wrong in their mind. Line reader. A line reader is basically putting up a screen on a passage, and the student can pull it down line by line so it focuses them on a certain portion of that passage.
And after you get past me in the next slide, maybe we'll stop and take some questions.
So at this point, the student will come to the end of the directions and click End Directions. And again, you're telling them what to do from the front of the room, or they can X out at this point. At this point is when the student will need to enter that access code. And the access code is different for each class per session. And when we get into classes, I'll talk a little bit more about how the best way to set up your classes in Nextera Admin. This isn't necessarily the way that students go from period to period each day. When you set up classes in Nextera Admin, you're going to want to think about how students are being grouped for testing. So if you have a large group of students, let's say in the cafeteria testing ELA grade 4, and those group of students are going to take session 1 together, and then tomorrow they're going to take session 2 together. It is best practice to set up those students in Nextera Admin the way that they're testing in groups. And the reason being, this access code, there's a different access code per class, per session. So it's really important that if you have a group of students that are testing together, that they share that same access code. And the only way that they're going to share that same access code is by being set up together in a class in Nextera Admin.
Sure.
So then the student would then click Continue. And then you would say Start Test. So that everybody together, start your test. I want to take a second to talk about staggering student start times. So this is Heather Art.
Yep. You can post this to your wall also. I think it makes some very nice wall art.
And this is an example of if you are in those large settings, let's say that you have 50 or more students in a cafeteria setting, we do encourage you to stagger your start time. And this flow chart shows you at what point you should stagger your start time. And it's at the point of choosing your test. So if you remember back to the one of the first slides where it says choose start test for session 1 or start test for session 2, that's at the point at which you are staggering your start time in, let's say, 2 to 3 minute intervals. If you've ever been in a large room with a lot of people and you're all trying to access the same Wi-Fi access point, your computers do tend to get a little slower. So that's the reason for staggering start times. So if you have environments larger than 30 or so students, we suggest that you are staggering groups of 30 or so students together. Tell them to hit start session 1, give them a minute or two, then tell the next group of students to then stagger their start at that point. So you can refer back to this to know exactly at what point you are staggering your start time. And it's at that choose your test session point. It's not at the wait to start point. It's when you choose your test session. When the student ends their directions, the first thing that they're going to see, just like a paper student, is their cover pages, tips, and sources. This is also another great checkpoint to make sure that your student is indeed receiving, being presented with the correct grade level and the correct session and the correct content test that they will be taking that day. So I have circled here in red where you can see that information on the cover page. Then the student will then enter the test. So all of those directions I just talked about, I'm just going to walk you through on the screen quickly where they belong. So the online-offline indicator is in your upper left-hand corner. You have a directions and sign out button in the upper right, and the student again can refer back to those directions at any point by just clicking on the button. If a student needs to pause or sign out for whatever reason, so maybe a student needs to take a bathroom break, they would pause or sign out of their test, they'll leave the room. When they come back to the test session, when they log back into that test, they'll be asked for one more piece of information. So again, they're going to need their NYSIS ID and password. They're going to need that same 4-digit access code that you used at the beginning of the test. And then they're going to be asked for what's called a proctor pin. And the proctor pin, I'll show you that in context in a moment, but this appears on your homepage. And there's a one proctor pin for an entire school. And it's just that extra level of security that a student isn't just leaving the room and going and testing on their own. So you as the proctor will have that information only, and we are asking that you are typing that information into that student's device upon their return to the classroom. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more. So all their buttons that you'll see on the upper right-hand corner is moved back and forth between the tests. The middle is your split screen controls for an ELA test. When you get to the end of the test, your right arrow will turn gray because you're at the very end. And this review button will turn to review and submit. This is where the student would hit review and submit to submit their test. At the bottom of the page are all the different tools that the student may see during testing. And again, these tools are on the question sampler, so we highly encourage you to refer back to the question sampler and to make sure that your students are not seeing these tools for the first time on testing day. These are some of the different tools that a student may see. So for ELA, they'll see a different, obviously, set of tools than for math. And then depending on what session you're taking for math or what grade level, you may see a calculator icon, you may see a ruler, and you may see a protractor. Also, for math, there's a math reference sheet as well. Here's an example of the equation editors. These are a little bit different from last year. There are a few new buttons for each grade band. So for grades 3 and 4, students will see this equation editor. For grades 5 and 6 or grades 7 and 8, they may see a different equation editor. Again, these are in the question sampler. It's really important that your students are using these prior to testing. Also, in the bottom right-hand corner of every type of box, whether it be a notepad, the equation editor, or the constructive response boxes, these 3 dashes indicate that you have the ability to pull. So you can pull and resize and expand the 3 different types of boxes, the notepad, the equation editor, and the constructive response box. When a student gets to the end of the test and they hit that review and submit button, they'll be brought to this page. This is an example of what the review and submit page looks like. You'll see here I have bookmarks clicked on. Each of these fields is a clickable field. It defaults to unanswered. So in this case, if I clicked on unanswered and I had 5, they would show me the 5 unanswered questions here. In this case, I have bookmarks highlighted. So you'll see there's a little bookmark icon and the numbers that I bookmarked. If I now want to return at some point to number 3, I can just simply click on number 3 and it'll bring me back to number 3 of that test. When I'm done, I can click the review and submit button again, and it'll bring me back to the same screen. Heather, can a proctor help you at this point to make sure that students have responded to every question?
That's a great question. Absolutely. You know what we did last year, Christy? We added it to the teacher's directions as a best practice that our students should raise their hand, and then when they're ready to submit their test, and then the proctor can come around and review the review screen with the student. Now, say the proctor notices that Billy has 5 unanswered questions. The proctor can certainly indicate, "Hey, Billy, I see 5 unanswered questions. Do you want to leave those unanswered? Is that what you meant?" And if Billy says, "Yep, sure do," then at that point, that's all the proctor can do. The proctor then will assist the student with submitting the test. Of course, the student is just submitting the test on their own. They're clicking that button. There's nothing that the proctor is doing other than active proctoring. Okay, that's as far as it can go. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yep.
Then we get to the point of, indeed, they want to submit their test. They'll click on Submit Test. They'll have one more layer. They'll have to hit, "Are you sure?" "Yes, I want to submit my test at this point." If indeed there is an internet connection at the end, they'll see a big green check mark, and they can stop testing and sign out at that point. If for any reason a student needs to pause a test to return to their test, again, I talked about the proctor pin for their username their session access code, and their proctor PIN. And again, you are, as the proctor, will have this information. We ask that you're not posting this on a whiteboard or a chalkboard, that this is information that only you as a proctor have in the room. You type that proctor PIN in for that student, and the student then can return to testing. If they pause the test at, say, number 6, when they get back, it'll return to them to number 6. So it'll pause them at whatever point they paused at that point. Here's a quick screenshot of where the proctor PIN. This is just a snapshot of the home page. So again, if you have access to Nextera admin right now and you log in, this is an example of what it looks like for a district test coordinator, because I have multiple schools within my district. So for the middle school, this is my proctor PIN. And for my elementary school, this is my proctor PIN. This information is on your homepage currently. Also, if you want to change that information, you can just simply click on the blue link. A box will pop up that you can change your proctor PIN, and you can hit submit. We're going to stop there for a moment. I believe there's some questions that we need to.
Right, there's a question that came in that I would like you to address. And simply because, as a reminder, our hottest topic was exploding computers, internet goes down. What are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that our students' answers are saved and secure? So this came in from Megan Lundgren. What happens if a student turns off the testing device? If they turn it off, is the cache off? It's a good one, right? Would this be an instance where if a student has turned off their computer during testing, not paused, not submitted, that we should call Questar? Megan, this may be an instance where one thing that I didn't note at the beginning of this presentation is that during operational CBT, Questar sends 4 humans, technical colleagues. They call them laser team members. They do not have lasers, although that would be really cool. But these 4 colleagues are situated in locations throughout New York State so that they can get to any school or district within 2 hours. So at that point, if you do have this kind of instance, ask Questar to please send a colleague. We'll dispatch them. We get to use that verb. We're pretty excited about it. And they'll come in the computer, because Questar can always pull responses off of a testing device. However, I do want to let everyone know we didn't have however, if it does happen, you now know, call Questar. Keep that device sequestered, and I would even wait to turn it back on until a Questar colleague gets there. Okay.
What other questions do you have, Heather?
That pretty much was it. We were having questions about the proctor PIN, where to download the secure browser. We just want to make sure that all folks know that the download of the secure browser is occurring. The district test coordinator is that role, who really is the command center, right? They know, they'll be familiar with Nextera admin, where to get the download of the secure browser, and it's available on Nextera admin under the Help Downloads tab. But typically what we've heard, the way it goes, is the district test coordinator will then advise the district information technology coordinator to then go ahead and start the downloads, either work with, say, if it's Chrome in kiosk mode, maybe with a multiple device management software, but to deploy the secure browser to all the student testing devices, to make sure that all those testing devices are tested with practice. So that's really a scenario that happens between the district test coordinator and the information technology coordinator. And that's on the district level. At a school level, it may be the school test coordinator and the school information technology coordinator. Okay. So Barbara Weir wants us to review the dispatching again. You betcha. Okay, so Barbara, the RICs will know. So remember that the RICs are your first level, first tier support out in the field. And some of the RICs will actually have the laser team members on site. And so what happens is that if you feel like you have a scenario where you want Questar to look into it, your first move is to contact your regional information center and discuss it with them. They have troubleshooting tips. They also lived through operational CBT last year and gained a lot of experience. And so if it's necessary that a Questar colleague is dispatched to your school, the RIC is the one who is actually authorizing that and then letting Questar and NYSED know. Okay. Let's see here. There are Questar reps within 2 hours of all schools. Yes, so that was the scenario last year. So we did have Questar reps that could go into a school, like say if a school was having issues with their Wi-Fi. So we had where we dispatched some Questar colleagues to go and look at the Wi-Fi. Last year, those folks who remember, we had a known issue that involved, it affected the numbering on the secure browser. And the Questar colleagues went in and reviewed and found out that some of the Chromebooks just simply needed to be rebooted. It was that simple. And so we were able to post that known issue to Nextera admin when we were seeing that on Chromebooks. Mm-hmm. Yep,
so
what do you got?
If I took the operational test last year and I had the secure browser downloaded from last year, should I be downloading it, uninstalling and reinstalling this year?
That is a good one. We highly recommend this. So highly, all caps, underline bold. Okay, and we're highly recommending that an uninstall and reinstall process. While it is not necessary, what we had last year is we found that some schools might have had some computers that they pulled in off the bench, and these computers weren't updated. Maybe they hadn't been turned on in, say, 2 years. So perhaps that computer had a secure browser from 2015, and there have been quite a few changes to the secure browser. In fact, now, a significant change from 2015 is that the secure browsers are automatically updated, right? So any new updates are pushed to the app, to the secure browser app, and as a result of that, we want for everybody to know exactly where your secure browsers are, right? So keep your technology fresh. And a great way to make sure that every computer that you're going to be using for CBT operational is on the same page. They all have the same operating system, the same secure browser. A good way to do that is to just run an uninstall and reinstall process. For those of you that heard us in the fall and maybe even heard us this winter, what we recommend is that happen in January of every year. And we want to set this as a recurring expectation, right? So every January, we'll let you know what new changes were released into the secure browser for that year. For instance, this year, we'll be collecting operating system and device information from every student's secure browser so that we're able to help you more and better, right? And also, there is Christy will talk more about the text-to-speech voice pack, which is the other significant update that we made this year. Okay. See if we've got any other questions. Is there anything else that you guys think that here in the room that you're seeing that we could address? Sure. Okay, Questar dispatching. The RICs are the ones who will have that information, who will be able to contact Questar or NYSED to inquire about that. But now, keep in mind, you may be calling Questar as the district or the school. So we're all going to be plugged in. We're going to know when you're calling. We get reports from Questar twice a day regarding what's going on in the field, if there are any hot topics or any issues that we can actually address on CBT support. Not only that, but Questar is right here in Albany with us. So we have our Questar colleague, Helene Ginyadik, who is situated in the command center. So we have a great communication stream going between the districts, the schools, or among the districts, the schools, Questar. So what we just want to let you know is that your RICs are your first line of support, okay? But you could reach us in a variety of ways. Okay, all right, I think we're ready to continue on. Thanks, Christy.
Thanks, Heather. So we're going to get into the next section is Nextera admin. And this is, again, your administration, where you'll be going to set up your classes, your students, accommodations a student may need to their 504 IEP plan, So there's a lot of information in these coming slides. I think we're going to have to take a break at some point to answer some questions if that does arise. So let's start with talking about each of the roles within Nextera admin. Again, these are, the whole entire system is role-based, and depending on your role will depend on what part of the system you may or may not see. Let's start with talking about the teacher. The teacher is interchangeably used with the word proctor. These are the folks that are in the room with the students during testing. This might not be the teacher of record. When you're setting up your classes, you do need to have a teacher attached to each of those classes. But the word teacher, like I said, is basically a virtual user. You want to, if I'm a district test coordinator and I actually don't have any need for any of my teachers to actually have access to Nextera admin, I can make myself a teacher and be assigned to each of those classes. You have then access to set up those accommodations and get everything ready, print those login tickets, and then you can provide everything that the teacher or proctor needs in the classroom via paper. So you'll give them their login tickets, you'll give them their access codes, you'll give them their proctor pins. So when we talk about the teacher proctor role, think about how your school and your district will be set up. And again, you don't have to have physical teachers per se in the system. If you have a tiny little district and you have no need for those teachers to have access to Nextera admin, you don't have to have, they don't have to have access. So again, just think about that as we talk. And I wanted to get that right up front because I know there's going to be some questions that we can address in the questions box as I continue speaking. So the next set of users are your school level users. School level users have access to their whole school, including all of the classes within that school and the students within those classes. Then there's district level users. So those are your district test coordinators, your superintendent. These folks have access to all of the schools within their district, the classes within those schools, and then of course the students within those classes. And then we have the RIC users. These folks are in there to basically oversee all of the districts within their region, and then the schools and classes and students within those districts. So let's talk again about each of these roles individually. So the first role, teacher, parentheses, proctor. These folks, if they have access to Nextera admin, and again, if you are a small district and you have no reason why these teachers need to have access, they don't need to have access. You as the district test coordinator or the school test coordinator can do all of these tasks as well. So a teacher can review classes and students if they are in the system. They do have the ability to print login tickets. Do they have to? No. That's your decision at a local level who will be printing those login tickets. If they do have access to the system, they can administer assessment and monitor student progress during testing. And as we go through each of these roles, so the next role will have access to everything that a teacher does, as well as everything that they have access to. So on the left-hand side of the page, these are our school level users. So these are the school test coordinator, STC, the principal, PRN, and the building level user, the BLU. So they can do everything a teacher can do, but they can also view, add, and change accounts within the school. They can assign student accommodations and not tested codes. They can view, add, and change classes and students. And of course, they have access to track progress during testing. On the right side of the page, when we're talking about the IT folks, so these are the tech folks that really don't have any need to see student and class information. So when these folks are assigned a role, when we call it a school information technology coordinator, or on the next page, we'll call them a district information technology coordinator. These folks, when they log in, we're only going to see access to the home and help tabs. They have access to, on the help tab, to download those secure browsers onto students' devices. They don't need to see the students. They don't need to see the classes. These are just the folks that are there for the support role. They can ensure device and network readiness. And of course, like I just said, they can download the test delivery system, which is your secure browser. Going to the next level side of the page, your district test coordinator, your district level user, and your superintendent can do everything that a school level user can do as well as a teacher, but they also see it from a higher level as well. So they can view, add, and change accounts within their district, and then they can access and track progress during testing for their entire district as well. Right side of the page, the DITC, Also has same access as an SITC, so these are your information technology coordinators. They have access to only the home and help tabs. And their main role would be to download the secure browser onto each student's device. And they can access that through the help tab. Lastly, at the highest level, we have your RIC role. So these folks can view all participating districts and schools in their region. They can generate status reports by district, school, or class during test administration. They can provide support to all districts in the region. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but they also can assist districts with adding new students or creating classes via the new district upload functionality on Nextera Admin. So we do have a new feature this year where you as a district or school can upload what we call the pre-ID upload. So you can upload students in classes and move students around via this template upload. This is new functionality. As we have more information about this functionality, we will be sharing it with you in the coming weeks. So let's talk about each of these different roles. There are some of these roles there can only be one of, whereas others there can be multiple of. So the first list, there can be only one of each of the following account types per district or school. So there can only be one district test coordinator. But if I have other folks in my building or district that need to have the same access as I do, we can create what's called the DLU. It's your district level user. There can be multiple of those. They have the same access as you, and they are there to basically support you in your role. So if you're the district test coordinator and you have somebody of the equal level, you can create a new account for them called the DLU. It's the district level user. Superintendent, there's only one of you. Principal, there's only one of you. But also school test coordinator, STC. There's only one school test coordinator in a school. But again, if you need access to someone else that has equal rights as you do and you need somebody else in that support role, you can create a BLU, which is a building level user. Again, these folks have the same access as a school test coordinator, but there can be multiple accounts of a building level user. When we talk about roles, there's two main questions that we always get. Who can assign accommodations and who can set not tested codes? So when we talk about accommodations, who can assign student accommodations? When I went through the test delivery system and I showed you all the different tools that are available to students, those are tools that are available to all students. When we talk about accommodations, these are based on their IEP and 504 plans, and I'll go through what each of those accommodations looks like and how they may apply to your students. But first, let's talk about who can assign those accommodations. While this is a district decision as to who completes this task, know that district level users and all school level users have access to add accommodations for students. Teachers, on the other hand, can only assign individual student accommodations. Depending on our time later, I'll show you the multi-edit student page live. And what the multi-edit student page is you can assign accommodations to a group of students at the same time. You do not need to individually set those accommodations on a student-by-student basis. What I'm saying when I say teachers can only assign an individual student accommodation, they do not have access to that multi-student edit. And not tested codes. Who can assign not tested codes? District level users can all do these, and as well as your school level users. But again, this is a district decision as to who will assign this not tested codes for each student. And I'll go into showing you how to set those not tested codes, and maybe that'll bring some clarity as to who you think in your district will be doing that task.
We're getting questions about who is the proctor building level users. So is it time to go over that yet? Is it time to
ask me something more specific?
Is it time to talk about enrollment, proctors, teachers, etc.? Where are we?
Not quite, but we
can. Okay, all right. Maybe we should. All right. So one thing that we want to let you, actually, let's say that we'll go over it later. Let's just set the stage to let you folks know that we're going to talk about how students are loaded to Nextera Admin. We're going to talk about what a proctor is. What does it mean in this new virtual space that we have here where there are no more brick and mortar walls for testing and you can organize students in a variety of different ways. So we're going to go into that in depth, but I do want folks to know, if Christy hasn't already said, that Right now in Nextera Admin, the teacher role is not available, so you will not be able to see it. Okay, so as is the Students tab has been disabled. So those two things in Nextera Admin, those will be visible and available for folks to see on February 20th when we load the teachers, or I'm sorry, the students for ELA. We are not loading teachers, and we'll go into that a little later. Okay.
So I'll stop at each of those sections and let you talk in full.
Thank you.
So in the next few sections here, I'm going to actually go through all of the different tabs, per se, in Nextera Admin. Like Heather just said, when I'm going through all of these, if you log into Nextera Admin, do not be alarmed if you do not see the Students tab, if you do not see the Classes tab, and also when you go to create an account, if you're trying to add a teacher account, that's turned off for the time being. When we load all of the students on February 20th, we will turn that functionality back on for the students, classes, and the ability to add a teacher. So when you log into Nextera Admin, if you're an operational school, your district test coordinator and your principals have already received a welcome email with their username and password. When they logged into the system, upon initial login, they were asked to change their password as well as accept the security agreement. And at that point, then they could then sign into Nextera Admin. This is an example of what our homepage looks like. In the middle of the page right now, you might see a What's New section. I put up the testing status dashboard because I want you to see this, because right before testing begins, that What's New section gets pushed down on the page, and the main part of the page will be the testing status dashboard, which is right here in the middle. We call this the donut. As students it'll give you basically a snapshot of your district or your school, depending on how you're filtered, with the total number of students that are scheduled. And as students begin testing and take the test and finish the test, this will fill in with a color, and you'll see that your student testing is progressing. This is not updated in real time. It's updated every few hours throughout the day. And we'll get you those time frames in the coming weeks as well. I want to walk around this page a little bit. So along the middle here in blue, you'll see different tabs, and this is the different tabs that my presentation is broken out into. So I'll go through each of these tabs in full. Along the top also, this is really important information as well. This is where you filter whether you're a district test coordinator or school test coordinator, whatever the case may be. But if you're looking, let's say, for a specific student, at this point, I would click on change, and I would filter down to that school and even that content level to find that particular student, whether I need to edit their account, whatever the case may be. Always check back to the very top of your page to see how you're filtered. If I click on change, it's going to ask me, what do I want to work on next? So if I'm a district test coordinator, I'll have the ability to change the schools within my dropdown. If I'm a school test coordinator, it's going to fill in this section for me, and then I can always change the content as well. So you would click change at that point, and then you'll be filtered to that level. This goes for when you're looking for an account. Let's say if your principal forgot his password, and you as the district test coordinator are looking to reset that password for that principal. If you are filtered down to the wrong school, let's say you're filtered to the middle school, but that principal you're looking for is actually part of the elementary school, you won't see that user's name in the accounts page because they're filtered to the wrong level. So again, if you're looking for something in Nextera Admin and you're not finding what you're looking for, always check back to the very top of your page to make sure that you're filtered the way that you want to be filtered. So we're going to talk about accounts now. So on the accounts tab, this is the page where you come to create additional users if necessary. So as I think you have all become aware at this point, only your district test coordinator and your principals have been activated for operational this year. And the reason for that is that's the information that we have from NICED in what they call CEDREF. So this is basically our source of truth and knowing that you are indeed the principal or the district test coordinator for your district and schools. From there, you can create additional users based on all of the different user types that I talked about a little earlier. You come to the accounts page to create new accounts. You can edit accounts. You can also send users their login information by activating an account or resetting passwords as well. When you're creating a new account, there's a couple of fields that it asks for. It asks for a first name, a last name, and a user ID. The user ID should always be the user's email address. It will not let you save anything but a valid email address in that field. Also, upon initial login to Nextera admin, you'll be asked to reset your password. Your credentials are sent to you via email, and when you log in for the initial time, you'll be asked to change your password, and these are the rules in which you'll need to follow. When you reset your password upon the first time, it will show you those rules on the screen for you as well. You do not need to memorize this information. So I clicked on the Accounts tab, and here at the bottom, you'll see a list of all the users depending on how you're filtered. So in this case, I have 2 users shown here. I have a user ID, their last name, first name, email address, their account type. So this is where all those different acronyms come into play. So your DTC is your district test coordinator, your PRN is your principal. I will show you your membership, whether you're part of a district or a school. And you'll see some of the actions here. So if I see a view and reset next to a particular user, this user is already active in the system. Let's go back to that instance where a principal has asked me to reset their password. I can come right to this accounts page, look for that principal's name, click on that reset action, and an email will be generated and automatically sent to that principal's email address, so that principal then can follow those directions on resetting their password. If you see activate next to a user, that means that that user is currently not active in the system, and you can click activate to have that system generated email sent to that person's email with their username and password, as well as the URL for Nextera admin. If I want to view a particular account, I click on view next to that user's name, and I'm brought to the view account page. At this point, I can click on edit. In Nextera admin, across almost every page, edit is in your upper right-hand corner, and then you always must save in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll show you those as we go through. So I can click on edit, and I can edit this person's account. In the middle of the page, I'll see the first name, last name, email address. I can adjust this as needed. You'll also see a checkbox that says this account is currently active. Well, let's say our principal has left for other opportunities and they no longer work with our school. If I want to deactivate their account so they no longer have access to Nextera admin, I can do that by simply editing their account and unchecking this checkbox and clicking save. That will then deactivate that user's account and they will no longer have access to my school information. Along the bottom of the page, you'll see here, you'll also need to select roles. So as I spoke of before when we were talking about that teacher proctor role, and maybe you don't want access for your teachers or proctors, I, as a district test coordinator, maybe want to make myself a teacher and assign myself to all those classes. This will make more sense when we get into that section, but for the sake of this presentation, I just wanted to show you where this is. So if I want to make myself a teacher, I would choose from this drop down the teacher role, which is not there right now, don't forget.
That's right.
I would choose the teacher role and I can hit add role, and it would show up on the right hand side with the rest of my roles. So one user can carry multiple roles. Then always look for that save button in the bottom left hand corner. Back to the accounts page, if I want to create a new account, you can click on new account. And for this example, I actually wanted to create a new teacher account because there's a little bit more information that you might need here. So again, you're typing in first name, last name, their email address, which is their username. If you check this box at this point, once you hit save, it's the account is currently active box. If that's checked and then you hit create an account, that system generated email will automatically be sent to that user's inbox. From this role type, if I choose teacher and then I assign them to a district or a school, below the fold in most cases, depending on your screen size, it will ask for additional information needed. You cannot add this role and save it unless you add a couple more pieces of information for teacher roles. So for teachers, when you create a teacher role, it asks for a teacher's ID in the content areas in which they are going to be assigned in Nextera admin. Specifically, it asks for a teacher's ID. We do not expect you to know all of your teacher's IDs in Nextera admin. You can simply type in a few digits here and you will be able to save for that teacher. So this is for your informational purposes only. We do not export this or send this back to NICED for, again, this is in Nextera admin only. So I click on create an account and that new teacher role will have been created. The next section that we're going to talk about is classes. After classes, we'll talk about students and how students are uploaded into the system, and I'll turn that back to Heather at that point. So let's talk about classes for a second first. So as we had talked about a little bit, when you are setting up your classes in Nextera Admin, you want to make sure that you're grouping students according to how they're testing for CBT purposes only. These classes are virtual. They are not exported on any level. They are simply for the way that you organize your classes within Nextera Admin. They do not have to align to instruction. So again, if you have large environments, or just in some cases you might group students according to an accommodated form that they may need, such as text-to-speech or read aloud, the way that you are testing your students should be the way that you are grouping students in classes. So consider classes for student testing accommodations. And remember, when you are grouping these students according to their classes, those groups of students will have the same access code, which will create an easier administration when, let's say, these 30 students are with this particular teacher or proctor. I can simply say a 4-digit code such as 5621. This is your session access code. Enter that in and go. If I don't group my students that way, in the way that they are grouped together in a testing environment, it's going to be a little messy when it comes to the point of needing those access codes per session. And I'll show you all of this in context as we get into where those session access codes live and what these classes look like. So when I click on classes at the top, you'll see all of the classes depending on how you're filtered. So in this case, these are the 2 classes that I have. If I want to, and you'll see here too that you'll be able to name your classes according to whatever makes sense to your school or district. So if let me talk about delete first. This is a new enhancement this year that you can delete empty classes. So maybe you get ahead of yourself and you've decided that you want to reorganize the way that you set up your classes initially. You can delete those empty shells. If I want to view a particular class, I can click on view, and this is where I can move students around. So if I click on view next to a particular class, this will show me all of the students in that particular class. And you'll see that these are just and nice IDs. But you'll see all the students in your class. In this case, there's only 3 students in this particular class. In the bottom right-hand corner here, you'll see an export. If you click on this, download students in this class, it will bring you, it'll pop up an export file here, and this is an example of what that file looks like. One of the nice things about this particular report is you'll also have a column for the different accommodations. So this is a good checkpoint to make sure that you have assigned all of the accommodations appropriately for each of your students. So that's just a nice export that we have in there. Also, if I need to edit the students in this class, maybe I need to move students around, I click on Edit in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm brought to the Edit Class Details page. At this point, you can edit this information, so you might want to change the teacher. You can name this class whatever you'd like. So the class can be ELA Gymnasium 9 a.m. It literally can be however it makes most sense to you. At the bottom of the page, you'll see the students in this class. So in this case, on the right-hand side, these are the students that appear in this class right now. If I need to add students from a different class into here, I can search by class in the upper left-hand corner and choose, let's say, students from the cafeteria. I need one of those students to be brought into this class. So I choose that other class up here, and all those students will be listed on the left.
We've got a lot of questions about proctoring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just finish this section, and then we'll take some questions.
Sure.
So we then, if I need to add a student, I check the box next to the student's name. I hit the right arrow, and that student will then be entered into this particular class, and then I can hit save. If I need to remove a student, I do the reverse. I check the box next to the right side, next to the student on the right, and hit the left arrow, and the student then pops out of the class. And make sure you're always hitting save. At that point, you'll be brought to back to the class details page, and let's stop there and answer some questions.
Okay, guys. So I wish you could see my arms, because when I use my hands, I feel like it's easier to understand, and I think we're fun to watch. So anyhow, let's get into enrollment and loading students. So first of all, last year, just to give lay the landscape of what we did last year. Last year we loaded students based on staff student course. And in doing that, we also loaded what was called the primary teacher. For those of you that don't know what staff student course is, this is a SIRS template. A lot of this information is loaded probably from your student management system. It's pushed up to level 1 and then to the level 2 data warehouse, which loads our student data. That's our source of truth, level 2. So we loaded students according to staff student course with the primary teacher. Well, guess what? There is more than one primary teacher. So for a lot of schools that sent more than one primary teacher, we had to guess. We had to create a rule for what teacher to send because we didn't know. So we sent the teacher with the lowest numerical teach ID. And guess what? That wasn't the right teacher for most of these schools. These schools had to go in, they had to remove those users, they had to create new users because the correct or primary teacher wasn't loaded to Nextera admin. Additionally, a lot of schools, they had a lot of work to do to remove teachers and maybe put proctors in. I mean, in some instances, the school librarian was the proctor, right, who was actually physically in the classroom or watching Nextera admin. So this year, we loaded by enrollment. So all schools who are operational CBT, they will have, say, a bulk load of grade 3 ELA students. And those students will be loaded into Nextera admin in a class. And here I'm using air quotes. I know you can't see them, but they're there. A class that is called Pre-ID grade 03. Okay, so all classes will have the same name in these bulk loads in Nextera admin. Additionally, there will be a teacher that is not a real teacher. And we understand that this gets confusing and that we need to look to how are we going to label this user role next year, or classes. Will classes be testing locations? We don't know what changes we're going to make for next year, but we do know that as we've made this shift into this virtual world, that it's been a little complicated to understand, right? Because you also can't see this in Nextera admin yet. So the teacher is loaded with first name, district, last name, school, right? So that's not a real teacher. That's just a, you can absolutely test in this bulk way. What we've heard is that a lot of schools are setting up command centers, right? So they've got, for instance, this was a great model we heard about from a New York City network. They made the school test coordinator the teacher role in every class in Nextera admin. And what they did is they would also add perhaps, and have everybody sitting around screens in a command center watching Nextera admin. And different maybe school test coordinators or building level users were responsible for watching different classes and the testing status details page from one central location, this command center, and they're watching to see, how many students have opened the test in the cafeteria testing location, how many students are in progress, how many students have paused the test. They can also see if students are offline or online. So this command center, what this did is this provided a scenario where the proctors actually in the testing location were actively proctoring, right? They're walking around, they're assisting students, they're watching students take the test. They are not distracted by the Nextera admin computer screens, right? Now, this is just an example of what some schools did. And in other schools, the proctors who are in the classroom are the ones watching the computer screens. We even heard of some schools that situated technical colleagues watching the testing status details page out in the hallway, so that the active proctors in the classroom, if there's an issue such as, say they've got an issue where a mouse isn't working for a student and they need a new mouse, then that proctor can walk over into the hallway. They call the technical colleague who's there on hand, who can then assist. Maybe they take the student device out into the hallway. Because one thing overwhelmingly that we heard from nearly all our schools last year, and directly from the students when we went and we observed field testing on computers, is that computer-based testing creates a testing environment with fewer distractions. There are no rulers dropping to the floor. There are no pages flipping. The students were able to be independent, move at their own pace, and had fewer distractions. So what we're trying to do this year is we're trying to, share with you how can you build upon that great feedback and testing experience that we've heard from the schools. So this means that teachers aren't loaded into Nextera admin. You'll have to create teachers or proctors or building level users or school test coordinators, whoever's going to be associated to those testing classes. So, okay. So we got some questions that have come in. So I'm just going to read through these, and the colleagues in the room here are sharing them with us. So, do we have to assign students to classes? You don't. You can leave students. You can leave all your grade 3 ELA students in that one bulk container for testing. This way, they'll all have the same access code. Is this the best solution for security purposes? Probably not. Right? And organization, because another tip that we haven't shared yet is that we heard that a lot of our schools moved their students that might have testing accommodations into different classes, virtual rooms. Like for all the students that did text-to-speech, they would move them all into a different class or testing room in Nextera admin. So can classes be imported? Classes cannot be imported this year. Through the pre-ID, the first load. But what we're working on with Questar right now is a district upload process. And many of your RICs, they have seen this. We have already shared the prototype of what this is going to look like for a school or a district to be able to create classes en masse with teacher roles associated with groups of students, and then to move them around in Nextera admin. So your RICs have already seen what this is going to look like, but we won't be rolling this out for another 2 to 3 weeks. We'll be working with Questar next week in beta on how this process is working, but this is a bulk upload process for creating classes, moving students into the classes, moving students around. So I got a question that we test by homeroom. Can we import this en masse? Perhaps. And I will tell you that at the first roadshow in Long Island, there was the name of a file that was suggested, and Joe Stern shared with me that this was the name of, like, say, a homeroom file. So the RICs may have the answer there. They may have that data for you. But what you'll be able to do is you will be able to create your homeroom testing locations via this template upload process. Okay? And so one tip that we have heard is about creating a late room, a late arrival room, right? This was a great tip we heard this summer. Have your proctors identified and maybe have that room already set up in Nextera admin where you might move students into it. So you hear that, say, a bus or the subway is late, and you know you've got like 20 students on that bus or subway. You'll be able to move those students out of your testing class that's active, that's already going. Those students have started the test, and move them into another class just for organizational purposes. Do you have to do this? You don't. But this is just an organizational tip that we heard from some of our operational schools last year. Not only a late arrival room, but also a makeup room, right? You've got students who might be absent on session 1. Maybe you're moving them out of that active room where the students are actually testing. And one of the reasons the organizational tips, what we're saying, is that you want to be able to see on screen, on Nextera admin, only your students that are testing right at that moment, because you're going to be able to see how many test questions they've navigated through. Oh, I see Billy is on number 10 of number 30. You're going to be able to see if they're offline or online. Maybe there's a computer that's having trouble connecting to the internet, right? Connecting to Wi-Fi. You'll be able to see that, and you want to be able to focus on Nextera admin, just those students that are testing at that moment. Perhaps you do, right? This is what we heard as we rolled throughout this day. You can do it any way you want. We don't have rules or regulations for how you're setting up testing in a virtual world. You can knock down those brick and mortar walls. Printing lists of students to check, not tested, etc. Student rosters, say your test read. This is a feature that was available last year in Nextera admin, and it'll be available again this year. And what our schools did is they would move students into, say, a class called Taking Regents, right? And be able to organize students in those kind of groups to be able to get a better picture, again, of just those students that are actively testing during a testing day. So is there anything else that came up, guys, while I was talking through that?
Yeah.
Okay. Keep sending us questions. We understand that this is pretty new, right? This whole like virtual space that we have. We heard so many great tips from our schools. This is not NYSED making this up. We are providing to you what we've heard from our schools. And again, if you're an operational school from last year and you have a great tip to share with us, please send it to us in CBT support. We love sharing information and making sure that all folks know, you know, other schools may not have thought of something that they can do to streamline CBT. The CBT, computer-based testing, and the administration really is simple. And so that's it for now. Thanks.
Stop me again if we need to stop.
All right.
If there's hot topics out there. Until then, I will continue. So now we're going to be getting into the student section. So we already talked about the accounts page and the classes page. We'll talk a little bit more about students and what it looks like to actually edit a student page. And again, if you have more questions as far as laying out your students in classes, continue to ask those questions and we'll try to clarify as much as we can. We understand this. There are quite a few questions about it, but I think we'll get right through it. So when we get to the students page, there's two ways that you can get to a student. You can either view them from the classes page when you're viewing your class, or you can simply click on the student tab, and then depending on how you're filtered, all your students will appear at that point. This is an example of what the student record looks like. So if I clicked on Johnny's name, for instance, and I clicked view, it'll bring me to this student's record page. I can then click edit, and then all of these fields within this page will become editable. So I can change any demographic information if needed. One of the most important things on this page is your testing language and your accommodations. So again, if a student needs a specific language for math or a specific accommodation for ELA or math, you're coming to that student's record and editing it and giving that information here. This is where you as the administrator have to do the back end coding per se, so that the student is presented with the right information when they're testing. So when you're on that edit student record page, you'll see in the middle of the screen in the first red box, it says testing language. So if I have a student that needs to take one of the 5 alternative language tests for math, you click on that drop down next to that testing language. From there, you can choose one of the 5 languages there. And at that point, once you click save and that student receives their login credentials at that point, the student will be presented with the correct language test for math. Going back to that page, also on the edit student record page, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's a section called for ELA. You'll see the ELA heading. And those are the accommodations for ELA. Below the fold, there's also a section for math. So if a student needs an accommodation for ELA versus math, you need to make sure that you're modifying the correct section. So for this particular presentation, I have ELA here. I would click on modify, and at that point, I would be able to assign one of the accommodations. Once you click modify, these are the accommodations that you will see at this point. If I need to assign a particular accommodation, I just simply click on the blue icon, or click on the icon next to the accommodation, and it will turn blue. I then click on save. Let's go through each of the accommodations at this point. I'm going to talk about each of the testing accommodations, and I know we're going to need to talk a little bit more in depth from the state about test spread and text-to-speech, but we'll get there in one moment. So let's talk about the answer masking tool. So if a student needs this particular accommodation for the test, you would assign the answer masking tool. This is what it might look like to the student. You'll see when the student sees each of the questions and answers, the answers are grayed out, and they would click the I next to each of the answers to unmask that particular answer. If a student might need a background color change, this is an example of what a blue background looks like. There's also pink, green, and yellow. And that's all something that you as an administrator are coding for that particular student on the back end prior to testing. The key point there is that you need to do this prior to testing. I can talk about that a little bit as well, that it's really important that you're setting up all of your accommodations before you're even printing your student login tickets. And the reason being is that certain accommodations point to certain forms. And when we get to test read and text to speech, those particular accommodations serve up a Form A. So it's very important that you, again, are setting your accommodations prior to printing student login tickets. If a student gets into their test and they are not seeing the accommodation that they should be seeing, or maybe they don't like the accommodation that they're seeing, there are several steps that need to happen in order to have that student's form reset, and we can go through those in a moment as well. So just know that it's the best result from all of this is that you are setting those accommodations ahead of printing login tickets and the student entering the exam. This is an example of what reverse contrast looks like. It's a black background with white text. Initial page zoom is another accommodation that we have available. If, for instance, you can choose 150%, 200%, 300%. This is upon initial login that the student sees this particular zoom level. At that point, the student will still see that same zoom tool that any other student will see. And if they toggle with the zoom at that point, then whatever they toggle that zoom level to will persist until they toggle that again at the next question. So again, this is initial page zoom. This is what the student will be presented with initially upon login. Then we get into text-to-speech and read aloud. So let's talk about text-to-speech first. Text-to-speech is an accommodation that's online only. This is controlled by the student. This is the robot on the computer talking to the student through the computer. The bottom right-hand corner is an example of what the text-to-speech player looks like. The player can be moved around on the screen using the dots on the right-hand side of the page. The student would click play whether they're on the passage or the question or the answer. They have the ability to right-click also to play from here. So if a student gets through the passage and they want to have, let's say, the second paragraph repeated, they could right-click on that paragraph and they can say play from here. This text-to-speech accommodation is available in the question sampler, so we highly suggest, again, that your students are touching this player and using this player ahead of testing. Not to be confused with read aloud. So let's go back. Text to speech, this is online only. This is a robot voice talking to your students through the computer. Read aloud, if this is assigned to the student, so this is another accommodation, but this is when a human is sitting next to the student and reading from a paper test booklet while the student is taking the test online. So if you assign this particular student the read aloud accommodation, they will automatically be served up test form A. And why is that important? It's so that you as the reader have a test read print copy next to you to serve up that accommodation for that student. I'm going to let Heather talk a little bit further about this because I know there's always questions, Heather, about how do I get that paper version of the test read accommodation if I want my student to have this particular read aloud accommodation.
Right. Okay, so in addition to magic, we also have a process. All right, so all students testing on text-to-speech, read aloud, alternate language, Braille, large print, which the last two are paper tests. These are all called our specials at SED. We refer to them as our specials, and they're all Form A. Many of you know that tests are spiraled within the classroom in paper booklets. Well, they're spiraled by student in electronic. And there are 14 to 16 forms per subject, so that not all students are taking the same test, right? But for our specials, because a lot of them require that there is a accompanying print paper test, we need to make sure that they're Form A. So when students are being provided the accommodation through Nextera admin, read aloud by human, that is setting Form A. When the student sits down to take the test, the student will see on the cover page that they have Form A. When schools indicated their test read quantities in the ordering system, we knew to send them a test read booklet packet, which is 2 paper booklets. So this allows that the human reader will have Form A and the student will have Form A. We get asked, we've been asked recently, and we heard about this last year, of the human reader perhaps reading over the student's shoulder from the computer screen. Please don't do this. We provide you with paper copies so that the human can, respect the student's space, right? And at least, have their own paper copy, and they don't need to hover near the student when reading the test. Additionally, we've been asked, can we group students in like groups of 5 to have 1 human reader? Absolutely, you sure can. It can, but what we recommend and what we advise is that those students receive their test according to the way that they receive daily instruction. What is the typical way, the standard way that a student is receiving the test read accommodation via human reader? Is it in bulk or is it one-on-one? So you have to think about those things. We don't want new testing situations for CBT on the day of testing for a student. We want students to be comfortable. Additionally, for text-to-speech, also those students are being served the Form A. So think about it. You may have a classroom of 5 students that are listening to the robots read the test to them, but they've all got headphones, right? So you may only need 1 human reader who is reading the test directions to the students, because reading the test directions, it's the same in a test without an accommodation versus an accommodation. Those test directions are always read to the students. So what kind of questions?
Can students who have a read aloud accommodation have the student use the text-to-speech with headphones accommodation, or do they need the test read by their teacher? So I'm not sure if this is referencing an IEP.
Yeah, so, and this is good. So I haven't made the point that all students that are using a testing accommodation that's enabled through Nextera Admin, they're doing this because this is noted in a student's IEP or 504 plan. So what is the implementation recommendation for that student? And does the district need to consult with the CSE? We're not talking about, calling all CSE committees to come together, but does there need to be, at least some kind of question asked between the district and the CSE? And this is where we beat the drum, and we want all our schools to know that students must have practice with the computer-based tests, right? Especially our students with accommodations. You want to know whether or not the robots reading to the student is an appropriate way to deliver the test read accommodation on computer, or if that student really should have a human reader. Okay. What else?
We tried to order counts for tests read on the portal, and the window would not permit, even though we selected CBT testing. Can you please advise on how we ensure that Form A will be sent to our district?
Sure. You should have been able to indicate your counts of test read unless you were trying to indicate more than 100. There's a cap, and we did hear some schools were trying to order 100. I don't know if that's the case for whoever asked the question, but if indeed, you can always send an email to the Office of State Assessment. You can find that information on CBT support. You need to contact them, or in the ordering memo, which is also on CBT support, to find out how many quantities we have. But the principal will have that quantity indication in the confirmation email that came from the test portal. However, what if you still need more? You will make an additional materials order, request to Questar, and you can find an article on CBT support now. The title is something like, "What if I need to order paper copies for my CBT grade level?" And that will provide you with the information about that's in the ordering memo. Additionally, you can always find Questar's contact information on CBT support. Okay. So, question came in: what about speech to text? So, speech to text does not work with Nextera Secure Browser, because speech-to-text or diction software, that's software that has to be running on the computer, and with the Secure Browser running, you can't have any other software that is running, okay? So that may not work with CBT, with the Nextera Secure Browser. We've asked if a scribe could be used in some instances, and this is really getting into, you need to figure out what is most appropriate for the student. And if you ever have a question about accommodations, you should send it in to CBT support or contact the Office of Special Education. This summer, knowing that this is such a hot topic, our accommodations, and that hearing some of the feedback about how the independence and the confidence that CBT is giving to some of our students with disabilities, we have a colleague now from the Office of Special Education who worked with us this summer, went to some presentations with us, and we even worked together with the Student Advisory Council on Special Education, where some students did some usability testing on the computer-based tests. So we will get an answer for you if you want a specific answer, if you can't find it on CBT support. But do try searching for CBT support first, because I like to write. There's a lot of words out there. What else do you got, Christy?
I have a twofold question.
Okay.
So Cynthia asked a great question.
All right.
I'm going to turn it a little bit, but how closely to testing can an accommodation be set?
That is a great question. All right. Testing accommodations can be set up until the point that you print login tickets, right? But even if, say you printed login tickets for Sally, you realize that you didn't select text-to-speech for Sally, you can set text-to-speech for Sally, but you may need to reprint another login ticket for her, right? The password is changing. When you're forcing Form A, you're forcing a different form. The passwords are tied to the forms. So it's real time when you're setting these accommodations, but if you're changing accommodations, making any change in that respect right up until the testing window, you need to check the username and password on Nextera admin. You may need to print a new login ticket for that student. Now, think about it. What if Sally had already entered the test? Sally's entered the test. She's on question number 5, and the proctor realizes, uh-oh, Sally doesn't have the robots reading to her. She's reading the test. Well, Sally should have her text-to-speech robots reading to her. So in that instance, this is going to be called what we call a form reset. The school needs to call Questar, who then will call NYSED, and who will authorize whether or not a form needs to be reset. Now, Sally was testing without having her text-to-speech accommodation. Sally most likely was not testing on Form A. So her answers to questions 1 through 5 need to be documented by the 2Human documentation system, and you need to assist Sally with getting her answers back into her computer-based test when she has Form A. How long is that going to take? For a form reset, it could be a 2 to 3 hour process. So this is one reason that checking those accommodations that the students need to have, you really need to double check and triple check them. And you can do that easily by printing student class lists. They're all on almost every page in Nextera admin where you can have a list of students. You can download that list and you can see the accommodations that are set. So please do that double checking. But you know what? If it happens, it does, and call us and we'll work with you to reset that student's form.
So piggybacking on that, though, more specifically, a student just came to my school, but I don't have the test read copies for that particular accommodation.
Great.
How closely to the window can I be asking for those additional materials?
I believe it's about a week. Clara, what do you think?
For the additional materials.
There will be additional materials available on an emergency basis at our regional centers, right? Which you can obtain the day of. So you have to do that. That's our normal process for obtaining materials.
What's the window for calling Questar and still getting those AML? It is 1 week. I was right. Yay.
And additional materials are always available throughout the state at our emergency pickup centers, or we call them regional centers.
And so say the school's calling and it's 4 days before the test. Questar will tell that school you need to pick up those additional materials at the regional center.
On how to proceed.
There you go. Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, I have a new student that came from either in-state or out of state.
Oh, this is my favorite.
How do I get that student in Nextera admin?
Okay, this is great. All right, we're gonna tackle both scenarios. Okay, so as you know, all students are logging into the computer-based tests with their NYSIS ID. And if you're a student that's born in New York State, you are born with that NYSIS ID, right? Okay, it might be created at pre-K or kindergarten, but students that live and go to school in New York State, they have a NYSIS ID. And so if you need that NYSIS ID, the NYSIS ID can be obtained from the NYSIS ID app that district users have access to in the NYSID business portal, right? So you can just add a student in real time and create a login ticket for them maybe a couple hours before that test. I mean, really, it's just, like minutes before, but, surely you're more organized than that, right? So, but we did have instances last year where, say, a school might have noticed that, a student was missing. You just add that student through Nextera admin and create a login ticket and get that student testing. Now, say you've got a student that's coming from Pennsylvania. That student was not fortunate enough to be born in New York State and be born with that NYSIS ID. What we created last year is called the Fast Track NYSIS ID process. And this is available only to schools that are administering operational CBT, and it is only available during the operational CBT window. It is only available, again, through the NYSIS ID app that is available through the NYSID business portal. So what happens is that a school knows they've got this student from Pennsylvania. The student doesn't have a NYSIS ID at all. The first thing that the NYSIS ID app requires is that the user who's using the NYSIS ID Fast Track app search on the student's demographic data. Because it could be that you find, that student actually went to kindergarten in New York and they have a NYSIS ID. Here it is. But if you truly find that the student doesn't exist, then you can create a Fast Track NYSIS ID. This is a NYSIS ID that begins with 99999. Okay, we can watch this NYSIS ID in the Nextera admin system. We know we get daily reports for how much has been created through the NYSIS ID app. But then the district still needs to follow that regular NYSIS ID process to have a real NYSIS ID created for the student. And then you're following up with us, and we're replacing that in Nextera admin so that all the data is proper when it's flowing back to L2. And I will tell you, we had 7 instances of Fast Track NYSIS IDs created last year. And out of those 7, only 2 of them were truly needed. The other schools found NYSIS IDs existed for some of the students they were searching for in the Fast Track system. Okay, and we followed those, and they were replaced, and there was no issue last year. Any questions on that?
Should we keep going? Because I do have some more questions.
Okay, sure.
Can students, this is a great question, and I can answer this too. Can students try using these accommodations during a practice test prior to actual test implementation, both so you can ensure the accommodations you've set are working and that they've experienced using them? Experience, yes, but to make sure that you've set them, no. So students can access all of these accommodations in the question sampler as well as the practice test forms that were released on Friday. But the student cannot log in prior to testing to make sure that accommodation is set.
Absolutely not. Your check is occurring through those student downloads or on the View Student page in Nextera admin. So you can print lists of students. That should be your check. The accommodations are listed in the list of students. Okay.
All right, there are some more questions going. We're going to continue to answer those as I move forward in the presentation. Lots and lots of great questions. Let me get back on track here. So we just talked about all of the different accommodations and how to set those accommodations. The next thing I want to talk about are the not tested codes. Not tested codes, for instance, absent for the day of the session, or a test refusal, or taking the test on paper, whatever the case may be. There's a few different places within Nextera admin that a student can have that not tested code set for them. So not tested codes this year, there's a new enhancement, can be set on the student page, and I'll show you that in a moment. As well as in the past, we can set them on the test page or the testing status details page. So on the students page this year, the administrator can set not tested codes by subject or by session. And let me show you what that looks like. So in the same area where you saw your accommodation, so this is a snippet of the, when you're on the edit student page, when you scroll down, you can either set for, let's say ELA is one section or math is the other section. You'll see there's a set status button there. At that point, you can set a not tested code by subject. So you're setting this code for ELA, or you're setting a code for math. So you have that ability to do that there. By clicking on that set status button, you'll get this set status codes box. You can choose the radio button not testing and then choose a reason from the drop down and hit submit. You can also set the status code by session on the student page. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the edit student page, you'll see that there's a grid there, and it would say session 1 or session 2. Go all the way over to the right and you'll see a set button. So you can set per student by session whether the student needs a not tested code set there. So then you would choose set next to, let's say, session 1. That same set status codes box appears. You choose not testing and choose a reason at that point. Same as last year, we can also set it from the test page, and I'll show you this in context in a moment when we get to the test section. But from the test page, you can also set the not tested codes there, and I'll show you that. I'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. And you can also set a not tested codes by clicking on one of the sessions next to a student's name in the testing status details page. Same as last year, but again, I'll show you that in context in the next section. So that's where how you set not tested codes. Now the next tab we're going to talk about is the test tab. So you'll see, not yet, but when we get closer to testing, you'll see the test tab. In the test tabs, there's 3 important pages here, and this is where you'll get your login tickets, or you're going to see your access codes. So really important information falls in this test tab. The first page that you'll see here is the important dates page. This is just information that we have uploaded into this area. In this case, it's just your operational and field testing dates. The test tab with the ability to print student login tickets will be available 5 days before the CBT testing window start date. For ELA, we will open that around April 3rd. While I know that could all be screaming on the phone right now, April 3rd may be your spring break. We are working with NICED and Questar are working together to figure out a different date, earlier date, that you'll be able to print your login tickets so that you do not need to come in during your break to do that. The reason why we wait until so close to the testing window to open up that test tab is because this becomes secure information. This becomes, once you print your login tickets, those become secure materials. Also, we want to make sure that you're setting those accommodations, getting those students where they need to be, getting your classes set up. All of this is really important tasks that you will have the ability to do prior to printing your login tickets. So we want to make sure all of those tasks are also complete before we open up the test tab. At that point, once that test tab is open and you print those login tickets, again, those are secure materials and are to be distributed on the first day of the CBT test session for those students. So another tab that I showed you, so in the test tab, the next page is called the test page. Let's talk about this a little bit. So when you set up your classes in Nextera Admin, you did that on your classes page. You got your students added to the correct classes, or maybe you just kept all of your students in one big bucket named ELA grade 4. Whatever the case may be, when you go to your test and then test page, all of the classes will be listed here. So if you only had one class that you created, you're only going to see one class listed here. If you have multiple classes, you're going to see multiple classes listed here, all by the name in which you name them. If I want to view a particular class, I click on View next to that class. At that point, I'll be brought into the View Test page. Ding, 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 ding. This is where you get your access codes.
That's nice. I like that. That's great. Yeah. All right.
You can see your hands flashing.
Yep. They did. I think the ding let them know.
I like that.
Yeah. Nice.
So at this point, you'll be able to see the access codes for that particular class. So in the middle of the page here in the first red box, depending on how you have your classes set up, you'll need to go into each one of these classes and receive these codes. So again, if I have one of my classes set up as the gymnasium, I would click on class or view next to the gymnasium. These are my access codes for that group of students. Same goes for if I'm in room 101, whatever the case may be, however you set up your classes. If you go into view each of these class pages, you'll see your access codes right in the middle of the page. Session 1 access code 4 digits, Session 2 access code 4 digits. If for any reason you need to adjust those access codes for the ease of this presentation, I named them 11112222. We don't want you to name your access codes 1111 or 2222. Why? There's a really good chance your students are going to be able to figure those out. The system does generate more difficult 4-digit codes, but we suggest that you either leave those the default or keep them equally as difficult so they are not able to be guessed by the student. So that is where your access codes are per class. At the bottom of the page, you'll see all of the students that are in your particular class. In this case, I only have 2 before the page gets cut off, but it shows you the last name, the first name, the nicest ID and password for that test. You'll also see that connection status column. This is new enhancement this year for that online-offline indicator for the student's device. You'll also see the status for each session that the student is taking. This is also a great place to be for testing. So if you're the administrator and you are, let's say, in your office and you're kind of overseeing the whole district, this is a great page to be toggling between all the different classes in your district because you can see the total number of items completed. You'll see those timestamps for started and completed. Just like the students, there's a heartbeat going on for the students about every 60 seconds. The students' answers are being captured by Questar servers. Same goes for this page. Every 60 seconds or so, this page is updated. So this is real time. Again, you're on the test tab and then the test, click on tests again, and it brings you right to this page. Upper left or about middle left-hand side here, you'll see login tickets and examiner view. If you click on the login tickets button, at this point, you'll be able to choose 3 different types of login tickets. Avery labels 5160, Avery labels 5163, or you'll be able to print it in a class roster format. Best practice that we saw last year, when I was able to visit a district in central New York, they printed all of their login tickets on, let's say, Avery label 5160, the most common label. And at that point, they took their labels and they put them each on index cards. So now all of the students will receive an index card as their, let's say, login ticket. When the student, before the students started testing, they had their students flip over those index cards and write their device name and the room number in which they were testing. Why? Because if there is something more catastrophic going on and you lose your internet and a student needs to return to a specific device, you have all that information because the student flipped over their index card at the beginning of the test and they wrote that information on the back of their login ticket. So you can simply just collect their login ticket and you'll have that information already. Is it required? No. But is it best practice? Sure. Also in this page, you'll see the examiner view button. The examiner view button basically gives a user who does not have access to the system otherwise a snapshot of this page so that they can view this page in real time, again, without needing access any other point in time. So let's say that you have a proctor, again, who doesn't have access to the system. You didn't set up that person as a user in the system. They didn't need access for any other reason. But maybe on testing day, you think that you want each of the folks in the rooms with your students to have access to this page. They can see those timestamps. They can see their login information if they needed it. They could have those access codes in front of them if they need them. At this point, if I'm an administrator who does have access to Nextera admin, I would go to that person's device, log into Nextera admin, click test, and then test again. It'll bring me to this page once I click the right class. If I click on examiner view at this point, it will bring up a new tab. Once that new tab is open, I then go back to the original tab, which is my Nextera admin account, and log out. I'm left with just this page open with no other access to Nextera admin, but this page is updating in real time. So it gives a user who typically doesn't have access to Nextera admin a snapshot of their class during testing, if that is indeed the way that your school or district would like to work. Also on this page in the bottom right hand, you'll see that there is another place which I talked about really quickly, but this is also where you can come to set status codes. You can set those not tested codes. So again, you're looking for a particular student, session 1 or session 2, so this is by session, and you click set next to that student's name. This same box will pop up. I choose not testing and then choose a reason and hit submit. The last page under the test tab is the testing status details page. This is a way to filter at the top. So you can filter down to a certain level. And again, this is just another way of looking at testing to see progress during the 6 days. In the middle of the page, you'll see a blue bar. This will show you the number of students testing, number of sessions, not started, in progress, completed, and not testing. So again, a snapshot of what's going on in your school or district, depending on how you're filtered at the top. There's also an export at the bottom right that you can export this page as well. Also, this is another place where you can set the not tested codes. So depending on how you're filtered at the top, you'll see a list of students at the bottom. And you can, by clicking on this link, you can click on the blue button and the not tested code information will pop up. I want to touch on this again because this appears in Nextera admin. The Proctor pin, again, if you were to go to your home page right now and you look, depending if you're a district level user or a school level user, you'll see the Proctor pin on the bottom of your home page. So you'll see the school. So this is testing my middle school with a Proctor pin, in an elementary school with your Proctor pin. You may have 5 or 6 schools within your district. Each of those will have their own Proctor pin. And again, that's important for when a student needs to come back into the test for whatever reason, if they had paused the test. So some things that you'll need to have a successful administration on computers. Really important, you'll need those login tickets. I just showed you where you got those login tickets. You go to the test and then test page. You'll need your access codes. You access that in the same information on the same page. So each class will have their own access code for session 1 and session 2. Then you'll need, of course, your Proctor pin. So it's important that if the teachers or proctors in your room do not have access to a device, you're supplying all of this information to that teacher prior to testing. So the teacher will have the Proctor pin in front of them. Students also can have scratch paper. So for ELA students, you can start with one piece of paper, unlined, or is it lined? Lined, I apologize. Lined paper for ELA, and then for math, they can have
unlined and graph.
Unlined and graph.
One piece of each.
It's also important to have teachers' directions in front of you. Students can have their school-provided handheld calculator for math tests. There is a tool online with the calculators, but a student can also have those hard handheld calculators as well to use for testing.
For the session.
Depending on the session that they're supposed to. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you.
The students can also have the math reference sheet. So there is a math reference sheet in Nextera admin, but they can also have the paper copy next to them. So all of this information is detailed and will be in the teacher's directions forthcoming. The last tab that we're going to talk about is the Help tab. From the Help tab, this is where you can contact customer support. There's 3 ways to contact customer support. You can call, email, or chat live. Also, we post commonly asked questions as well as support documentation such as the manuals, quick reference guides. And this is also where your tech folks will come to download the secure browsers. This is our customer support line for New York. Again, if you have access to Nextera admin, you can just simply click on the Help tab, and this information will be there for you. Let's stop for a second. I have one more section I want to cover, but is there any hot topics that we need to talk about?
What do you guys think? What about not tested codes? So the question was, came in, and I did answer it already, but I just want to go over it. Do we have to set our not tested codes immediately? You don't. You sure don't. And so last year, what our schools did is they would, did you share the index card and them writing their not tested code on the back?
So, not with the not.
Oh, okay. So Christy's got this example, right, where she saw these students are, they're writing down their computer name on the back of the card, but also suppose you have some students in the class that you hadn't previously identified as taking Regents. You would have those students, you could, this is just, something we heard that schools did, have that student turn over that index card and write taking Regents on the back of that card. That student can get up, they can leave the classroom, hand the card into the proctor, and then the school, at their own convenience, can go in and set those not tested codes. Okay, so those do not have to. What we want is we want our schools to be able to focus, again, I'll say it again, just on those students that are testing, right? Creating that great testing environment with few disruptions. Okay.
We have some scratch paper questions.
Ooh, sure.
The first one is, can you clarify again which type of scratch paper is allowed for each test?
Yep. Okay.
And then piggybacking on that, we have a very specific
All right.
question.
So for scratch paper, for ELA, and this is on the first page of the School Administrator's Manual, or it's in the introduction and the teacher's directions. Additionally, you can search on Scratch or Scrap on CBT support to find out, cbtsupport.niced.gov, to find the actual details. We've got them copied out from the SAM. So for ELA, all students should be provided with one piece of lined scratch paper. The proctor should have additional quantities on hand. For math, all students should be provided with one piece of unlined paper and one piece of graph paper. Again, additional quantities should be kept on hand. Student raises their hand, they need more paper, give it to the student. We did have one school, one district that had sent in some questions about taking the scratch paper away from the students. Please don't do that. Don't take the scratch paper away from the students. Those students can, if they're planning their essay and they're planning their math and they're writing it all out and they've got a pile of scratch paper, that student has that paper until the end of the test. At the end of the test, the scratch paper is collected by the proctor and it's securely destroyed. We are not grading scratch paper.
More specifically, is it okay to give students scrap paper for math with boxes on it with space for each question?
It is not. We have received this quite a bit. Please, we want a standardized testing situation throughout the state. So no, you cannot manufacture and create a different kind of scratch paper to provide to your students. Good question. Anything else? What else do we see?
I think you guys can answer.
Okay.
All right. So moving on, the next section that I'm going to talk about are some of the new enhancements and new features that we have for both students and administrators. So if some of you are familiar with the systems from last year, you will probably, a lot of light bulbs will go off because you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. As I went through the earlier parts of this presentation, I did cover a lot of them already, but let's touch on them one more time. So how do we gather feedback? Questar and NICED believe in continual improvement to provide an online experience tailored to New York State students, educators, and educational needs. Questar and NICED documented feedback from schools, districts, RICs, BOCES, Big Fives, after the spring field test this past year. Feedback was reviewed and an enhancement list was created. Based on the feedback, enhancements were made to the student testing experience, test and item layout, and Nextera admin. So let's talk about some of those now. So the Nextera test delivery system. So for the students, I did touch on this already. So highlighted sections remain highlighted across an ELA passage that spans multiple questions. So if a student is answering or is on the first passage and let's say a couple of questions are associated with that passage, if a student highlights on that first passage that highlighting will persist through whatever questions are associated with that passage. Highlighter and notes will be saved when users pause a test. So if a student needs to pause a test for whatever reason, if they need to step out to use the restroom, or maybe they need to run to the nurse, whatever the case may be, once a student re-enters the test, the highlighting and notes that they previously had on their computer will be there when they return to the test. The math reference sheet is undocked and can be resized or moved. So it's just a tool at the bottom of the page. If student clicks on the math reference sheet, that math reference sheet box pops up. And just like, let's use an example like the calculator, how you can move the calculator around, you'll be able to move the reference sheet around, but you can also resize it. All constructor response boxes and notes can be resized. So as I showed you a little earlier, there's 3 dashes in the bottom right-hand corner. You can just pull those and resize those boxes. The ability to copy and paste from the notepad to the constructed response boxes. So the student will have the ability this year to copy and paste within the secure browser. If a student copies and that copy is, let's say, left on the clipboard and then they sign out of the test, it will not persist on that clipboard. They will not be able to paste it, for instance, on a Word document and then share it amongst, their friends. The copy and pasting is you can only copy and paste within the secure browser from a passage to the notepad or to a constructed response box. There is added functionality to the equation editor. I did show you those couple of buttons there. There's also a full PDF document on CBT support that does explain what each of the icons on the constructed responses are, or on the equation editors are. And then there's also 2 new calculators. There's a 4-function new calculator for grade 6 and a new scientific calculator for grades 7 and 8 as shown here. Those calculators are in the question sampler and the practice test, so the students can indeed touch those and play with them. But as I also noted, the students can have their handheld calculators for testing as well. So for Nextera admin, the ability to pause all tests or individual tests. So on that test page, when you're in a particular class, you'll see a pause all tests button, and then you'll see also a new column that you can pause an individual student test. Examples that this might be used, let's say a fire drill. You as the administrator can pause all tests per class, or maybe in an individual basis, a student maybe got sick and needed to go to the nurse's office but didn't pause their test first. You can do that right from your device. You would just go to that student's class and hit pause test next to that student's name. I also talked a little bit about the connection status. They'll see an online, offline indicator, depending if the student is online or offline with an internet connection. That's, again, from the test page. The ability to add new students through a template upload process and the ability to create classes and move students through a template upload. There is a new feature that is still coming. We will be putting out more information about this, but you will have the ability to upload in bulk students and move students around in classes with this new process. We will be, again, sharing more information about this in the coming weeks, and we will post information about that on CBT support. There's simplified functionality to set not tested codes for students. So last year, the only place that you could set not tested codes was in the test page or the testing status details page. This year, you do have the ability to set not tested codes on the subject or session level by student from the Students tab. So that's additional functionality. You also have the ability to delete empty classes, and I showed you that as well. Oh, we're not breaking for lunch today.
No lunch.
Let's stop there and see if there's any questions, because I'm coming to the end of, oops. Any other questions that we should discuss?
I don't think so. Let me take a look. Let me take a look at the hot topics from the roadshow. But we are getting questions about when will the manuals be posted for this year. So we're currently working on the school administrator's manual and the teacher's directions. But I want to note there are no significant changes from last year. what we're doing is we are improving the guidance on CBT, like maybe describing the steps a little more in detail. So folks can review the school administrator's manual or teacher's directions from last year to get an idea of how CBT is documented in the school administrator's manual. Last year, some of you may remember the school administrator's manual was late, and that was simply due to CBT was new for the first time last year. So it'll be coming soon, and we will announce it all over the place. Big splash on CBT support and in the CBT listserv messages. Okay. So the Proctor training, we are still working on the date. It's going to be in March. We had to move it, right? Because we learned that March 27th was spring break for a lot of schools. So we'll be announcing that soon, but it is going to be in March.
The copy and paste function does not appear to be working in the math sampler.
Okay.
Sampler, in the question sampler, it's different than being in a secure browser environment.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
I do, but I want to look into that. So we'll look into that. Whoever posted that, can you tell us? Oh, Ramona. So my thoughts. Yes. Can you tell me what subject? I'm sorry. What grade level and what session you're looking at? 6th grade. 7th grade. Thank you, Ramona. We will take a look at that.
Sampler 1.
Got it.
Can districts not testing this year take the Proctor? Can districts not testing this year take the Proctor training in March? So if you are not a staff or
we would. So okay, we want to just make a note here about these webinars and these trainings. While it is great for folks to join to learn more about CBT, when we get to the Proctor webinar, that is really going to be very specific for those schools that have already had some kind of training, because what we're doing here now is we're training our administrators, right? We're providing more information. Then we hope that the model in the school is train the trainer, that the proctor is walking into that webinar. They already have some familiarity. They've already seen the question sampler. They've already worked with some students who are using the question sampler or the secure browser. So we just want to keep in mind that that proctor webinar is going to be for those proctors who really, they have some familiarity already with CBT. And our worry is that folks who are not participating in operational CBT this year or field testing, they may not have any kind of training or practice test simulation that's going on in the school.
Here's a good question about makeup tests. So can a 3rd grade student take the makeup while the 4th grade is taking the test if they're in a separate room?
Sure, absolutely. If your school can coordinate that, you've got a proctor for that 3rd grade student, you betcha. That is part of the versatility and ease that CBT offers a school.
Oh, Ramona, thank you. So that's a good point that we didn't talk about. So
is the answer?
No, the copying and pasting only works with a Control-C, Control-V.
Oh, sure. Yep. Yes.
If you want to talk, we didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah.
We just said copy and paste.
Yeah. So we're not providing buttons this year for a student to copy and paste. This is the Control-C, Control-V, and then it's a press and hold on the iPad, right? So we want to, and the reason we made the decision about the buttons, there are a whole lot of buttons that we would have added for students to copy and paste. And we keep hearing, are we testing, students' computer skills and how they can click a button, or are we testing the content? So we know from last year, and it was requested from our schools, that we at least provide those keyboard functions that most students are familiar with.
This one I've seen a couple of times. How will ELL students have access to both English and home language versions of the test? So alternate language and English.
Sure. No problem. For alternate language, say you've got a student that's taking Russian. when the school ordered the Russian, ordered CBT or PBT, any grade level, they indicated how many alternate language tests they needed. So if you had a CBT grade level, you ordered 80 tests for your grade level, and then you might have ordered 3 Russian tests. Just by virtue of indicating those 3 Russian tests, we know to send you some test read copies to accompany, so that those Russian students that are taking the test in Russian online have their test read English copy. Now, we get the question often, well, can a student decide on the day of testing where to put their responses, either in the paper copy or online on the computer? No, they can't decide on the day of testing. This should be figured out before a student sits for the test. We understand that in paper, the student often gets that decision on the day of the test. Oh, I'm going to record my answers in the Russian copy, or oh, I'm going to record my answers in the English copy. When students are taking computer-based tests, they're recording their answers online in the computer-based test, right? So here on screen, we've got where, I'm going to call him Tolstoy. We've got Tolstoy is recording his answers on screen in the Russian test. He can do that either in Russian, in his native language, or he can do that in English. So the student does have that flexibility, but they cannot record their responses in that paper English copy, okay?
I am going to show the multi-student edit. I'm just going to get everything ready. If there's any other questions before I do that, please continue. Did you guys see anything else that was on topic? Sorry. No. I just need a second to get this set up.
Sure. Oh, for the demonstration? Sure. Okay. How long can a test be paused? When resuming, must the same computer be used? Great questions, Janet. One moment. So a test can be paused for the length of the test administration window, okay? So at the end of the test administration window, we're going to be in contact with a lot of the principals and a lot of the district test coordinators, and we're going to identify those tests that have not been submitted. We're going to be working with the schools. So a test could be paused on day 1, and maybe the student doesn't get back to it until day 9. Day 9 is the last day of the makeup window. That's perfectly fine. There was a second part of that. Okay, must the same computer be used? No, the same computer does not need to be used. Why? Because the student paused the test. And so the student can pause the test and move to another testing device at any time. Well, I'm sorry, caveat, at any time, as long as the internet connectivity has been stable. Okay, so we do have an article out there on CBT support, and it indicates when a student can move to another computer, when a second student can use that same computer. It all has to do with pausing and with submitting. When you've got an internet issue, you need to work with us, contact us. We are going to work on an FAQ that really, provides different scenarios and what to do, because we learned on the road shows how to stop it, right? We need to provide a little more information there. Okay, so we also had a lot of instances last year where, say, a student sat down to test, and maybe the Chromebook wouldn't connect to the Wi-Fi, or maybe the mouse didn't work, or the volume wouldn't work on a computer for a text-to-speech student. So in those instances, the school just gracefully had the student pause the test and move to another computer and sign in. And we heard a beautiful scenario, and it worked well for a lot of students. What else do you got?
I can, at this point, do the multi-student edit demonstration. I skipped over that on purpose, and the reason being is that I think it's easier to show folks how this functionality works versus talking about it. So I have logged into Nextera admin. You all can see my screen, right? Yep. At the top, I've already gotten to the level that I needed to get to. So I'm filtered down to my middle school ELA. And I have a testing district in here, so this is not real data. This is just dummy information. When I clicked on students and then multi-student edit, this is the page in which that you have the ability to assign accommodations to a group of students at the same time. So whereas I showed you when you were in the Students tab and you just clicked on an individual student and assigned the accommodation for ELA or math, in this instance, I'm actually showing you for an ELA group of students how to assign it for multiple students at the same time. So let's, for instance, I'm going to give these first two students, let's say I'm going to give them answer masking and let's say reverse contrast. So these two students, I check the names next to their, I check the boxes next to their name and I choose the accommodations that I want to assign to those students. And then I click on save. What happens is it brings those two accommodations over to the active accommodations column on the right-hand side. Well, let's say at this point, I needed to add a third accommodation to this one particular student. If I was just to choose that particular accommodation at this point, let's say initial page zoom, it's only going to assign that initial page zoom. It actually overwrites the other two that I initially gave that particular student. So I would need to also click on answer masking and reverse contrast again, and then hit save. And that student now will have all three. So the point in this demonstration is just to tell you that when you're using multi-student edit, the best option to do so is when you're actually giving a group of students the same accommodation. You can use this in whatever way that you choose, but you do need to understand that it does overwrite. So if I was just to check this box and choose, let's say, read aloud, all these other three accommodations, once I hit save, are going to go away, and only that read aloud will be given to that student. So again, these are best used if you're grouping, let's say these four students are all going to get the same accommodation, let's say reverse contrast, that's when multi-student is most effective. If an individual student needs an accommodation, your best bet is just to go to that student's page and assign that individual accommodation for that particular student. So that's how the multi-student edit works.
And we have a request.
We have a request.
We do. It's pretty exciting. We would ask all the time at every roadshow. We never got a request. Can you create a class and show how to add students into the class? Yeah. Thank you, Emily.
So when I click on the classes tab, we all know something's going to go wrong with a lot of demonstrations.
Yeah, well, live demonstrations. It's to show all our corners and shadows. Yeah.
Just give it a second. We're all on the same Wi-Fi here. So, oh boy, thank you for that. So if I want to edit we want to create a new class.
Yeah, create a new class.
So we click on new class in the upper right-hand corner, and you'll be able to name that class whatever you'd like and with a teacher. Now I'm an active teacher in my district. You'll see that there's nobody else in my district that has the teacher role because I don't have anybody else set up as a teacher. The point in that is that you need to have at least one person as the teacher role in Nextera so that you can set up a class. I'll name that class Gymnasium. Did I spell that right? Gymnasium. ELA 4. So maybe that's my ELA 4 students. Then I'm going to start adding students to this class. Right now you'll see that there's no students in this class. You'll see up here in the upper left, I can search by a class. So I forget where my students are, but let's say ELA class 1. Oh, there's my students. Now if I want to take 2 of these students and add them to this class, I check the box next to their names, hit the right arrow, and then I would hit save. Maybe I need to now take another student from a different class. Let's see if I have any students. I might not, so I apologize. Oh, let's go there. This test class, I can take a student from here, add it to that class. So you can basically take students from any area. Maybe they are unassigned, maybe they're in a specific class. These are all just, again, dummy classes, but there's also an unassigned grouping. There's a really good chance that your students will be in that unassigned students bucket. In my case, there are not. But now if I want to remove a student, maybe I got ahead of myself, and I want to move this student 1 into an unassigned grouping, I would choose that search by class. I would choose it as unassigned and then use my left arrow, and that student will be put into my unassigned students group, and I would hit save, and now I only have 2 students left in my class. Is there And you'll see here, if I come back, I named that class Gymnasium ELA 4.
Okay. Ramona, I believe that was Ramona who asked that.
Is there any other
Or was it Emily? I'm not sure. I think it was Emily. Yeah. So somebody made a comment about overwriting accommodations, Chip. Okay. So you want to know a little bit more about why the multi-student edit overwrites accommodations. It's intended to be used only once for a group of students. And so if additional accommodations are needed, then that student would have individual accommodations added. So here's the scenario. You've got 5 students and they need test read, and they also need reverse contrast. Okay, so you take those 5 students and you add them into multi-student edit. Okay, so now, however, out of those 5 students, you have one other student, say Sally, and Sally also needs answer masking. So you would add Sally's accommodation to answer for answer masking as an individual accommodation. Okay. So the multi-student edit is intended for multiple students, multiple accommodations to be set at once.
All right, we'll take a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up. Let's see if we see any other hot topics.
Oh, that's a good one. So can students still have a handheld protractor even though it is provided on the CBT? That's a great question. The answer is no. No, because think about it. You can have Zoom. So the protractor and the ruler on computer-based tests, they're designed for the computer-based tests, right? As the student zooms in or zooms out, that protractor and that ruler also move with it, right, and resize. So a physical protractor would not assist the student on the computer-based test. Now, what if the student needed that protractor, wanted it for their scratch paper? And the answer there is no. Oh, good one from Lisa Slover. Okay, so can you talk about how a scribe would manage in a CBT setting? This is great. So the way that scribing works on the computer-based test is the same as how scribing works on the paper-based test. Okay, so the process is that the student is working with the scribe and they are speaking their responses directly to the scribe. The scribe is then writing down those responses on a piece of paper. They're sliding it over to the student, making sure that the student is reviewing that response. The student approves. The student says, yes, that is what I said. Then the scribe is entering that response into the computer. Now, whenever we talk about this, sometimes we get from the group in the room, well, should the student then review on screen what the scribe has written? Our process doesn't go as far as that, but why wouldn't you let the student see what the scribe has typed on the screen? Okay, so our process just involves, we provide the steps to getting that response on screen for the student. And there is an article, how do you use of scribe on CBT support with the computer-based test. Okay. Great. Anything else that you guys see your hot topics room? All right. Oh, I'm not going to tell the full story. I know that we're close to the end, but I did post an article on CBT support on Friday, and it has to do with the character limit in the CR boxes. So last year, the character limit was 5,000. This year, we have quadrupled it, and the character limit is 20,000. So take a look at that article because it also shows, it points to directly where is the tool for expanding the CR boxes, because we want our students to know that they can expand the CR boxes this year. They can use the slider to see even more of their CR box, to where they could see their introductory paragraph perhaps while they're typing on screen. So a lot of new tools this year to make the students comfortable. Okay. Okay. All right, guys. So I do want to go over, so copy and paste one more time. All right. So copy and paste is allowed this year. The student will be able to copy from the ELA passage or from the question into the notes pad or from the CR box, or into the CR box from the notes pad or from the ELA passage. So from both of those things. And the reason is that we want our students to try and move to planning their essays online, right? We're providing scratch paper again this year, but imagine the future. The future is where students are working, they're doing everything online in this electronic environment that we're providing for them. So we want them to be able to start planning their essays online and then copying and pasting those over into the CR boxes. Okay. All right. Can we provide handheld calculators to students during testing? Yes, you can. You sure can. So session 2 for grade 6. Students will have the 4-function calculator online, and they can also have their handheld calculator provided by the school. And for grades 7 and 8, there's a scientific calculator online, and as well they can have their handheld school-provided calculator. So
and that information is in the
SAM.
School Administrator's
Manual, and the teacher's directions, and on CBT support. We love this information.
Oh, this is a good question.
Yeah.
Yes for handheld calculators, but why no to protractors, Clara?
Ooh.
We already talked about that.
Yeah, because they don't work. I mean, you're not going to use your protractor to measure anything on screen.
And especially because of the student zooms in and zooms out.
Yeah. The screens and,
yep.
And
So practice tests. We are very excited. Drum roll! We released them. The new practice tests were released on Friday. For those of you that have not seen us in person, I will celebrate and clap for myself too in person. So the new practice tests, they're available now in the secure browser. Secure browsers do need to be installed on student testing devices in order for schools to take advantage of using and having students experience the secure browser so that they know they can't get to the Google or do other things in their computer. So those logins are on CBT support. You can find them in multiple different articles. They're in the announcements that they're coming, and links to how do I log in? What are the logins for the ELA practice tests? What are the logins to the math practice tests? And this year, they're very similar to last year's logins. Last year, I'm not going to tell you what the login was because it would just confuse you. So I'm just going to tell you what the new ones are. I'm not even going to go there. Look at that, guys. I'm learning. So the logins all follow the same format. They are subject, G for grade level, and then 03, 04, 05, for instance. But additionally, there are codes for all the testing accommodations so that our students with testing accommodations can log in and they can experience the secure browser also. There are 3 practice tests per subject, per grade level, per accommodation, per alternate language. And the purpose of the practice tests is for students to become familiar with the navigation and the online tools. Okay, we want our students to be ready for the test when they sit for them. We would not sit a student down and give them a pencil for the first time and ask them to take a paper test. In that vein, we want our students to at least, be familiar. However, we know Claire and I and Christy Tooker, she's observed operational. We've observed field testing. Those students, they're born on iPads, a lot of them, and they figure it out very quickly. It's really nice to see when students actually like taking tests.
But will teachers be able to see how the students are responding to those practice tests?
The answer is no. So the students' responses, they don't go anywhere. They don't go to that magical place called the cloud. The responses are not collected. They can't be collected for scoring, but what we're doing, that's a different kind of beast, a different kind of software beast. That is like a content management system, say, where a teacher might be able to put in her own test question, create it specifically for her class, and then collect the responses in some kind of online capacity. So we know that our schools need something like that. So what we're doing is we're working on free tools. So we've provided this year an online equation editor sampler It's basically an empty equation editor. It is only available in the question sampler because students, if the classroom has that capability, could actually print. They can print their responses. But what we want for a teacher, for instance, to put a math question up on the board and then walk around and have a dialogue with the students in the classroom. Talk about how are you answering this math question with technology? What buttons are you clicking? What else could you have done to answer that? What other buttons could you have used? How did you show something in a particular way? So what we want to integrate technology into the classrooms and into daily instruction and provide our teachers with more empty tools, say, where they can provide their own responses or their own questions. And after the road shows, we are working on an empty ELA, constructed response box. We can't offer it for this year, but at almost every road show we are asked, can we have one? Okay, we'll give it to you. So we are working with Questar on that. So stay tuned for that. And just one final note, practice tests. So I already said that. Yeah, they're on.
So this webinar is recorded and will be posted within 48 hours on CBT support.
Right, you can listen to us all day.
We will also, we understand there's a lot of questions that may not have been answered. We will export all of these information and put it in FAQ for you. And Heather will post that as well on CBT support.
And honestly, guys, there's a lot of questions in there. It takes me about 3 to 5 days to curate all the questions, make sure that I'm providing links to all the materials, so that this Q&A from any of our webinars is kind of a one-stop shop, right? You get to find all the answers, and you can find Q&As both from the Proctor webinar last year and the statewide fall webinar last year. So you can look at what kind of questions were asked last year and what kind of answers. So we do try to share a lot. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much. Goodbye. We're waving. Goodbye.